The story begins with our protagonist, Hirasawa Kazuki. Though his current reality felt anything but his own, shock rippled through him as he stared, not at his familiar reflection, but at the face of a spoiled, arrogant young nobleman, gazing back intensely from an ornate mirror. Panic tightened his chest. How did I get here? Whose body is this? The unfamiliar, expensive feel of the clothes on his skin. It was jarring, confusing, especially considering that only a few moments ago, upon first arriving in this strange world, he had been desperately assessing this very environment. And now, his focus snapped back sharply to the immediate horror unfolding before him. The scene playing out was far from a welcoming reception. A maid, her face streaked with tears and grime, endured a brutal beating, the scene hauntingly familiar to him. Then, recognition dawned, cold and sharp. This wasn't just any fantasy setting, it was a specific scene, ripped directly from the pixels and code of Brave Hearts, a fantasy role-playing game he knew intimately. It was a classic tale, a stereotypical RPG, where the noble protagonist, Liner, embarked on a quest to thwart a nefarious scheme threatening to plunge the world into darkness. Hirasawa, as he still thought of himself, had sunk countless hours into Brave Hearts. Its world, plot, and characters consumed him so fully that he memorized the dialogue, events, and lore, though always from a player's perspective. This deep familiarity allowed him to instantly identify the figures in the room. The imposing man overseeing the maid's punishment, radiating an aura of cruel authority, was Hayden Stokes, the formidable head of the Stokes family, a powerful noble house known for its arrogance and ruthlessness within the game's narrative. Standing near him, her expression a mixture of cold satisfaction and feigned concern, was Jessica, Hayden's wife, and the unfortunate servant bearing the brunt of their wrath was Clara. Hirasawa knew their names, their roles in the story, the grim trajectory of their interconnected fates. The scene was no longer pixels but tangible, terrifyingly real, though confusion still gnawed at him. Where was he? How had he been torn from reality and thrust into this digital nightmare? The mirror, the pull, only fragments remained. His anxiety spiked as he recalled this scene, a pivotal, devastating moment in the Braveheart saga. Within the game's narrative, this scene served as a tragic flashback, revealing the brutal execution of Clara, the mother of Colette, who would later become a key companion and heroine alongside the main protagonist, Liner. The executioner, according to the established lore, was the eldest son of the Stokes family, a character infamous for his cruelty and arrogance, Harold Stokes. But where was Harold? Hirasawa searched for Harold's child form from the game, but instead felt a firm weight on his head. Looking up, he met Jessica's glare, not at him, but at the suffering Clara. A horrifying suspicion began to bloom in Hirasawa's chest. So preposterous, so impossible, that his mind initially recoiled from it. This couldn't be happening. Acting on sheer instinct, a surge of revulsion against the implications, he roughly pushed Jessica's hands away. Instead of anger or surprise, a small, knowing smile touched her lips. Her next words, spoken with a chillingly casual affection, pierced through his denial like shards of ice. She addressed him, not as a stranger, not as an observer, but as Harold. She spoke soothingly, telling Harold that there was no longer any need for concern, implying the problem, Clara, was about to be dealt with permanently. The world tilted on its axis. Hirasawa Kazuki, the ordinary university student, was trapped not just in the game, but inside the body of Harold Stokes. Before he could grasp the identity shift, the scene lurched on. Hayden Stokes raised his gleaming sword, torchlight dancing on the steel, ready to strike Clara as Hirasawa's mind screamed in protest. But Harold's body moved on its own. In a cruel alien voice, he stopped his father, not out of mercy, but to request the privilege of executing the servant himself. Smiling coldly as Hirasawa watched in horror, Harold asked Hayden to grant him the pleasure, the privilege of executing the servant. Hirasawa felt like a puppet, his limbs moving, his mouth speaking words dictated by the game's programming, by the established character of Harold Stokes. He heard himself, Harold, boasting about learning a new magic spell, suggesting that instead of merely decapitating Clara and staining the room with her supposedly inferior blood, she should serve as his practice dummy. It was a display of callousness designed to showcase Harold's depravity, a key character moment in the game. Hayden, far from being horrified, beamed with paternal pride at his son's vicious suggestion. He readily agreed, ordering the guards to drag the terrified Clara away, not to the executioner's block, but to the dungeon, to await Harold's magical practice. The reason for Clara's persecution, as Hirasawa recalled from the game's lore, stemmed from prejudice. She was a half-breed, a lineage despised and considered inherently inferior within the rigid social hierarchy of the Stokes domain and the wider game world. This deep-seated hatred fueled the casual cruelty directed towards her. As Clara was hauled away, the voices in the room seemed to fade into a dull roar for Hirasawa. The reality crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. He was Harold Stokes, not just any character, but the most reviled figure in Brave Hearts. Infamous for his heinous acts, his insufferable arrogance, and his utter lack of redeeming qualities. Worst of all, Hirasawa knew Harold's fate, doomed to die by justice, a pawn of the final boss. Panic surged. Could he change it? Yet, his body moved on autopilot, bound to Harold's scripted role, leaving him a helpless passenger. The encounter with Norman, Harold's butler, further cemented this terrifying lack of control. Hirasawa remembered Norman from the game as one of the few relatively sensible and morally grounded individuals within the Stokes household. Norman approached him, his expression laced with a genuine concern, inquiring if Master Harold was feeling all right, offering his assistance. Inside, Hirasawa desperately wanted to confide in Norman, to perhaps find an ally, but Harold's body reacted with programmed disdain. The young master, true to his snobbish nature, brushed off the butler's concern with a curt dismissal. Despite the rebuff, Norman, ever loyal or perhaps sensing something amiss beneath the usual arrogance, made a quiet plea. He respectfully requested that Harold consider lightening Clara's punishment, reminding him that her life or death now rested solely on his young master's whim. Hirasawa's mind screamed, yes! He wanted to save her, to change this grim event. He knew the original outcome. Harold, in a display of cruel power, would incinerate Clara using his magic, leaving her daughter Colette orphaned and destitute, eventually forcing her out of Stokes' territory and into the care of Liner's family, thus setting up their fateful meeting. The dilemma was agonizing. Rescuing Clara meant deviating significantly from the established storyline. While saving her felt morally right, it risked altering the events that would eventually lead to Harold's encounter with Liner and the protagonist's party, even if that encounter was far from ideal. Hirasawa's main objective was survival, avoiding the many death flags scattered throughout Harold's path in the game. But drastic changes to the narrative carried their own risks. He could unknowingly trigger new, unforeseen dangers, pitfalls that didn't exist in the original game, leading to an even earlier or more unpredictable death. Desperately, Hirasawa tried to will Harold's body to show mercy, hoping to communicate his desire to spare Clara to Norman. But Harold's body remained stubbornly independent. Instead of a plea, another bratty, dismissive remark slipped out, further cementing Harold's reputation as a cold-hearted monster, and likely worsening Hirasawa's karma in this strange new world. And yet, somehow he managed to get the message across. He gave Norman just enough of a hint, silently urging him to act. To Hirasawa's surprise, Norman understood. He took action, stepping in first before Harold could escalate further. After giving instructions, Harold casually sent his butler, Norman, away and threw himself onto the bed, feigning indifference. But the fear remained, a cold, creeping dread. The idea of dying in this world, his consciousness possibly trapped here forever, with no hope of returning to reality, weighed heavily on him. Giving in to despair wasn't an option. If he couldn't control Harold's immediate actions or words, he could at least utilize Harold's downtime and resources. Realizing he was trapped in the body of a privileged, albeit detested young noble, Hirasawa resolved to arm himself with knowledge. He retreated to Harold's lavishly appointed room and began devouring every book, scroll, and document he could find. History, magic theory, politics, geography, anything that could give him a better understanding of this world, its rules, and its dangers. If survival depended on strategy, knowledge was his only weapon. Later, using the grim pretext of preparing for Clara's execution, Hirasawa had himself led towards the dungeons. A knight served as his escort. Upon reaching the dungeon entrance, Harold ordered the knight to stand guard outside, ensuring their privacy. Inside, the dungeon receptionist looked up, clearly startled and caught off guard by the young master's unexpected presence in such a grim place. Adopting Harold's imperious tone, Hirasawa vaguely mentioned needing to see someone within the cells and instructed the receptionist to remain at their post. With the entrance thus secured, Hirasawa then proceeded alone, descending the steps into the damp, oppressive atmosphere of the lower levels. He found Clara huddled in her cell, her face pale with fear, but her eyes holding a spark of maternal defiance. He needed confirmation, details that the game might have glossed over. He asked her about her daughter, Colette, verifying the information stored in his gamer's memory. Clara affirmed it all. Colette was her only child, her husband having succumbed to illness 3 years prior. Having confirmed the crucial information, Hirasawa turned to leave. But just as he moved away, Clara's voice, trembling with desperate fear, rose in a heartbreaking plea, begged him to spare her. For her daughter's sake, Harold's persona responded first. Cruel, dismissive words spilled out, cursing her very existence. Without hesitation, he turned and walked out of the dungeon, leaving Clara in renewed despair. Inside, however, Hirasawa was overwhelmed with empathy and sorrow. He wanted to cry, to reassure her, to promise safety, but none of that made it past Harold's cold exterior. All he could do was watch, helpless, as the woman pleaded not for herself, but for her child. Later, as he was returning to his room, Hirasawa approached Norman for another meeting. In the meeting, Norman provided his logistical expertise and knowledge of the Stokes territory, showcasing maps of the settlements within and bordering the Stokes domain. Hirasawa, adopting Harold's commanding tone, but directing the conversation with his own strategic mind, broached the subject. How could they save Clara? Norman, ever the pragmatist, suggested the most viable option was to help her flee the territory entirely, relocating her somewhere far beyond the reach of Hayden and Jessica's influence. Hirasawa quickly calculated the requirements for such an operation. They would need resources, transportation, perhaps sympathetic laborers or guards who could be discreetly swayed or bribed, and a secure destination. For the real Harold, manipulating resources and personnel would be second nature, a privilege of his station. Hirasawa planned to leverage this inherent authority. Norman, analyzing the map and considering safe havens, recommended a specific destination, the Blosh village. Hirasawa's internal database pinged immediately. Blosh village, that was the home of the Liner family, the protagonist's family. This was perfect. If Clara and Colette fled to Blosh village, it would align with the original story's outcome, where Colette meets Liner, albeit under drastically different circumstances. Harold, instead of being the cause of Colette's orphanhood, would paradoxically become her savior, albeit secretly. This deviation felt manageable, preserving a key plot point while achieving his moral objective and potentially altering Harold's negative reputation in the long run. Norman, astute as ever, pointed out the practical challenges. Fleeing with nothing but the clothes on their backs to an unfamiliar land would make survival incredibly difficult for Clara and her young daughter. Hirasawa, thinking rapidly, began listing necessities: money, food supplies, perhaps tools or items they could trade, warm clothing, identification papers if possible. He meticulously detailed everything they might need for the journey and to establish a new life, writing it down with Harold's hand. Norman watched this display with growing astonishment. The meticulous planning, the consideration for the servants' practical needs, the specific mention and concern for Colette. This was not the Harold Stokes he knew. The young master seemed transformed. Norman's intelligent mind worked quickly, piecing together the inconsistencies. Harold's earlier claim of wanting Clara as a magic test subject suddenly seemed like a calculated ruse, a way to isolate her in the secure dungeon, buying time for this escape plan. The butler began to construct a new narrative in his mind. Harold wasn't a monster. He was secretly playing a dangerous game, pretending cruelty to deceive his parents while working tirelessly behind the scenes to save an innocent life. This revised perception filled Norman with a newfound sense of loyalty and determination. He felt inspired, resolved to execute this rescue mission flawlessly, not just for Clara's sake, but for the sake of this surprisingly complex and potentially noble young master he served. Norman decided it didn't matter who or what was truly inside Harold's body now. This entity, this force, represented the last glimmer of hope for reforming the decadent and cruel Stokes family from within. The following day, Hirasawa sought out a secluded, abandoned clearing deep within the Stokes estate's grounds. It was time to test Harold's innate abilities, specifically his magic. Following the incantations recalled from the game, albeit feeling utterly ridiculous chanting them aloud, he focused his will. To his astonishment and exhilaration, flames erupted from his outstretched hand, dancing and crackling in the air. The raw power felt intoxicating, even if the chanting process itself was deeply embarrassing. He was wielding magic, real magic. Yet, his immediate focus, however, remained the impending rescue mission. He had two conflicting objectives: ensure Clara and Colette escaped safely, and simultaneously create the illusion that Clara had been utterly destroyed by Harold's magic, burned to ashes as per the original and publicly known storyline. This deception was crucial to avoid his parents' suspicion. The stakes were terrifyingly high. This wasn't a game with save points and respawns. Clara was a real person, Colette a real child. Failure meant their deaths, and potentially his own, if his subterfuge was discovered. He couldn't afford a single misstep. The plan had to be perfect. That night, under the cloak of a star-studded sky, the operation commenced. With Norman's meticulous coordination, Clara was discreetly retrieved from the dungeon. Hirasawa, embodying Harold, met her, and, to Clara's surprise and confusion, her daughter Colette was also brought there secretly by Norman's arrangement. After everyone was together, Hirasawa, using Harold's characteristic arrogant and demanding tone, presented them with their stark choice: perish within the Stokes domain or flee immediately, severing all ties with their past life and accepting the hardships of exile. He made it sound as though he was doing them a reluctant, bothersome favor, claiming it would be far simpler for him to just eliminate them both. Clara was shocked to hear the stark choice, but after expressing her desire to still live together with her child, she chose to leave the Stokes domain and be free. Harold, rolling his eyes outwardly but happy internally that she decided easily, then called out to Colette and gave her a simple necklace, an item Hirasawa had procured using Harold's allowance. He pressed it into Colette's hand, making her promise never to remove it. His instructions were cryptic. She was to give this necklace to a man, roughly her own age, who proved willing to protect her. It was Hirasawa's way of subtly guiding her towards Linear eventually, using the necklace as a symbolic token, though Colette, understandably, looked utterly bewildered. Her cheeks, however, remained flushed a bright red. With the final instructions given, Harold summoned the guards assigned to the mission, specifically Zen, one of the more loyal, if somewhat goofy, Hirasawa recalled, members of Harold's personals. He ordered Zen to prepare the wagon that would transport Clara and Colette away. He issued a final, chilling warning, his voice sharp with Harold's menace. If any word of this escape leaked, if the plan failed, everyone involved, including the guards, would face lethal consequences. The guards, despite their slightly comical appearance that Hirasawa remembered from minor game interactions, seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation, their expressions turning serious under Harold's threat. Hirasawa privately hoped their goofiness wouldn't lead to a catastrophic error. As the wagon carrying Clara and Colette disappeared into the night, heading towards Blosh village under Zen's escort, with instructions to provide Clara with gold coins Hirasawa had allocated from severance pay, Hirasawa, Harold remained behind with Norman. Alone for a moment, Hirasawa allowed himself to reflect on the ridiculous incident that had landed Clara in this mess in the first place. According to game lore, the original Harold had tripped and fallen into a muddy flower bed while Clara was watering it, blaming her entirely for his clumsiness and subsequent humiliation. It was such a petty, nonsensical trigger for a death sentence that Hirasawa felt a wave of secondhand embarrassment for the character he now inhabited. Shaking his head, he prepared for the final, crucial part of his plan, creating the illusion of Clara's demise. Meanwhile, Norman, walking away from the scene, was deep in thought, marveling at the recent changes in his young master, the calmness beneath the arrogance, the calculated planning, the unexpected flicker of compassion. His musings were shattered by a sudden, explosive sound echoing from the clearing Harold had remained in. Rushing back, Norman witnessed a disturbing sight. Harold was laughing maniacally, his voice echoing through the trees as he recited lines straight from his original, villainous game script, boasting about Clara's fiery end. Then, unleashing a torrent of powerful magic, far exceeding the simple flames Hirasawa had practiced earlier, Harold incinerated a portion of the forest, creating a scene of utter devastation. Just as suddenly, the manic energy subsided. Hirasawa regained momentary control, realizing with horror that Harold's ingrained personality and game script dialogue could automatically surface, especially under stress or when performing actions aligned with the original plot. He breathed a sigh of relief. Assuming Norman had already departed and hadn't witnessed his involuntary descent into sadistic raving, he absolutely didn't want his usually composed butler to see him cackling about murder like a deranged villain. His relief was short-lived. He turned to find Norman still standing there, his expression a mixture of shock, awe, and perhaps pity. Cornered, Hirasawa, as Harold, made Norman swear absolute secrecy, demanding he take the disturbing scene he had just witnessed to his grave. Norman, ever prone to misinterpreting Harold's actions through a lens of complex, hidden nobility, simply concluded that his young master was suffering from some profound mental strain, burdened by the lonely battle he waged against his parents' poor example and the darkness within himself. He saw the outburst not as madness, but as a tragic consequence of Harold's secret struggles, further solidifying his resolve to support him. Norman's tendency to glorify even Harold's most questionable actions remained firmly intact. The plan to deliver Clara and Colette to Blosh Village seemed to be working. While they were going to Blosh Village, Clara was in thought, thinking about how the guards were talking about how Harold had asked them to keep their mouths shut. Not only them, but also the horsemen. He had also spent time making sure to prepare a set of clothes, the horses, and the wagon. He was running around the whole morning making sure everything went according to plan. She recalled the mention of how he devised the plan, that after leaving Clara and Colette in Blosh, the wagon would go on to Leeds. This included making sure to give the gold coins to Clara, and the trip to Leeds village would act as a cover, pretending to go to a blacksmith there to buy a sword, thus explaining the use of funds. As they approached Blosh, Clara was notified that they had arrived, bringing her back from her thoughts. As the sun rose, casting a warm glow, Clara looked at the new village, a tentative smile gracing her lips. The next day, Harold reported back to his parents, Hayden and Jessica. Employing the arrogant persona flawlessly, he described how he had utterly incinerated Clara with his magic, leaving not even a trace, not a corpse to bury. His parents erupted in boisterous laughter, finding his brutal account amusing, treating it like the funniest joke they'd heard in ages. Hirasawa felt a wave of relief wash over him as their cruel amusement confirmed they suspected nothing. Phase 1 of his survival plan, saving Clara while maintaining his villainous facade, was a success. Life within the Stokes mansion settled into a new rhythm for Hirasawa. He threw himself into utilizing Harold's resources and innate talents for his long-term survival strategy. Zen, the guard who had escorted Clara, barged into Harold's room one afternoon, finding the young master deeply engrossed in what looked like alchemical experiments. Harold, annoyed as usual by the interruption, was attempting to create a life potion with restorative properties, specifically aimed at promoting plant growth. He was struggling to find the correct water ratio. The potion was potent, but without proper dilution, it caused plants to wither rapidly instead of flourish. Using Zen as an impromptu test subject, much to Zen's oblivious delight, Harold had him taste one of the potatoes he'd managed to artificially grow using a diluted version of the potion. Zen enthusiastically declared it sweeter and far tastier than any normal potato. This small success boosted Hirasawa's confidence. He was slowly mastering the knowledge and magical potential inherent in this world. His motivation wasn't purely scientific curiosity. Through Norman's diligent information gathering, Hirasawa had gained a clearer picture of the suffering within the Stokes territory. Natural blights and diseases had plagued the farmlands in recent years, leading to poor crop yields and immense hardship for the farmers, exacerbated by the Stokes' tyrannical rule and heavy taxation. Hirasawa, knowing the family's eventual downfall in the game was partly linked to internal instability and popular discontent, decided to proactively address these issues. Eliminating disadvantages for the common folk could potentially reduce future death flags associated with rebellions or betrayals stemming from desperation. He ordered Zen to take the magically enhanced potatoes, which he internally dubbed Red Groot based on some obscure reference from his old world, to the mansion's cooks, gather their reviews, and test the potion's effects more broadly. When not experimenting with potions, Hirasawa dedicated himself to rigorous physical training, particularly swordsmanship. He pushed Harold's young body relentlessly, practicing drills and forms recalled from the game. He knew Harold Stokes, despite being a scumbag, was depicted as a formidable warrior, a beast on the battlefield. Hirasawa, however, was just an ordinary student inhabiting that body. While he possessed Harold's physical potential and muscle memory seemed to kick in occasionally, he lacked the years of dedicated training and killer instinct. He had a lot of catching up to do. Combat proficiency was essential for survival in this RPG world, especially since he knew Harold was destined to confront Liner and his party eventually. Avoiding fights wasn't an option. Becoming strong enough to survive them was. Practice, relentless and grueling, was his only path forward. Time flowed onwards, marked by the changing seasons. Far from the Stokes territory, in the land of the Sumiura, another plot thread from the Bravehearts game was beginning to weave itself into Hirasawa's reality. The village chief of the Sumiura, a man named Tasuku, delivered grim news to his daughter, Erika. A mysterious disease, a miasma, was blighting their lands, devouring their forests, the cornerstone of their economy. Nearly a third of their territory was already affected, and the blight was spreading. Facing economic ruin, Tasuku had been forced into a difficult political arrangement. To secure support and potentially find a cure or aid, he had agreed to betroth Erika to Harold Stokes, the heir of the powerful, albeit notorious, neighboring family. Erika, depicted in the game as strong-willed but deeply devoted to her people, wept at her powerlessness but accepted her fate as a necessary sacrifice. Back in the Stokes mansion, Hirasawa was holding a strategic meeting with Norman, Zen, and Jake, the family's financial advisor, who also oversaw agricultural matters. Hirasawa, having meticulously analyzed the Stokes finances using information gleaned from both game knowledge and Norman's reports, presented Jake with a statement of revenues and expenses he had drafted. He challenged Jake to find any major errors. Jake, initially confused by the young master's sudden interest in fiscal responsibility, reviewed the documents and confirmed their accuracy. Harold, letting a hint of his internal persona slip through with a mocking laugh, explained the dire situation. The Stokes family finances were hemorrhaging money, primarily due to his parents' extravagant spending habits. They were propping up their lifestyle by draining the family inheritance and imposing crippling taxes on their citizens. But this unsustainable model was pushing the territory towards collapse. Farmers were going bankrupt, abandoning their land, and discontent was simmering. Harold declared it a state of emergency. To prevent impending bankruptcy and societal collapse, he proposed a solution: increasing agricultural yields through innovation. This was where Jake's expertise was crucial. With a dramatic flourish appropriate to Harold's persona, Zen eagerly presented Jake with a basket of the Red Groot potatoes. Jake tasted one, his eyes widening in astonishment at the flavor and quality. Harold explained his proprietary technique, LP farming, involving the careful application of his life potion, and outlined his plan. He needed Jake's knowledge of the territory's lands and finances to implement it. With a characteristic devilish grin, Harold warned Jake that pursuing this plan might incur the wrath of Hayden, who cared only for profit, and could even land Jake in the dungeon if things went wrong. Jake, though taken aback by Harold's bluntness and the inherent risks, didn't refuse. Harold detailed the LP farming method. Injecting diluted life potions into crops significantly accelerated growth. Red Groot potatoes, which normally took 2 months to mature, could be harvested in just 1 week using this method. Jake was flabbergasted by the implications. However, Harold also anticipated the potential problems. Flooding the market with cheap, high-quality goods could devastate farmers outside Stokes' territory and disrupt the wider economy. Furthermore, if his greedy father Hayden discovered the method's potential for profit, he would undoubtedly try to monopolize it, crushing the very farmers Harold aimed to help. Therefore, the initial rollout needed to be carefully managed, small-scale, and focused on alleviating local suffering while limiting economic disparity. He stressed the need for secrecy, especially from his parents. His team, Norman, Zen, and Jake, were stunned by the depth of Harold's foresight and the complexity of his plan. Jake, fixing his glasses, remarked on the groundbreaking nature of the cultivation method, surpassing known history, developed by someone so young. Norman, prone to hero worship, interpreted Harold's lack of personal greed as a profound desire to save his people, seeing the plan as a manifestation of noble sacrifice. Harold, feeling the need to maintain his difficult persona, snapped at them, asking if they enjoyed looking stupid or if they were born that way, reminding them he needed their counsel, not just stunned silence. He then demanded their loyalty, asking if they would become his arms and legs in this endeavor. Before they could fully respond, Harold's default tsundere villain mode kicked in, and he added darkly that if the people didn't accept his proposal, they were weak and deserved to perish anyway. Later, over a tense family dinner, Hayden and Jessica brought up the topic of Harold's marriage prospects, specifically mentioning the arrangement with the Sumiura family and Erika. Hirasawa immediately recalled Erika's role in the game. He also connected the dots. The miasma afflicting the Sumiura lands was a known plot point. This sparked another idea in his strategic mind. Tasuku Sumiura, Erika's father, was depicted as a compassionate and honorable man. If Hirasawa could gain Tasuku's trust and potentially ally with him, it could open up new avenues for support and help him navigate future death flags, especially those involving the Sumiura territory and Erika herself. Sometime later, the official meeting between the families took place. Harold, accompanied by his parents and retinue, paid a visit to the Sumiura estate. He finally met Erika face to face. Hirasawa recognized her instantly, the future comrade of Liner, a skilled healer, and a potential complication. The game dictated that Erika eventually joined Liner's party. Marrying Harold would drastically alter that, potentially weakening the protagonist's team and jeopardizing the chances of defeating the final boss. Even if Hirasawa survived all his personal death flags, if the world was destroyed, it was all meaningless. He needed Erika to eventually meet Liner, but he also needed to cultivate a positive, or at least neutral, relationship with her and her family now, without overdoing it and triggering unwanted romantic flags or altering her destiny too much. It was a delicate balancing act. Adasuku formally introduced his wife and daughter. Hirasawa, bracing himself for Harold's automatic arrogance, was pleasantly surprised when Harold managed a respectful greeting, likely influenced by the formal setting and his parents' presence. However, he noted Erika's blank, almost resigned expression. As protocol dictated, the parents soon left the young couple alone to get acquainted, leaving Hirasawa mentally preparing himself for the inevitable awkwardness and potential disaster of interacting directly with his designated fiancée while trapped in the body of her arrogant betrothed. This was a critical encounter, a do-or-die situation for managing future plot points. Left alone in the picturesque Sumiura garden, Erika initiated the conversation, formally reintroducing herself, her politeness bordering on nervousness. Harold, Hirasawa, mirrored her formality. She pointed out a unique cherry blossom tree, explaining it was the symbol of the Sumiura family, its origins tracing back 500 years when the first feudal lord brought seedlings to this land. Hirasawa, drawing on obscure game trivia, commented that this specific blossom type differed slightly from other cherry blossoms he was aware of, perhaps a look-alike species. This unexpected display of botanical knowledge surprised Erika, who hadn't pegged Harold as someone interested in such details. Hirasawa quickly tried to backtrack, stating the specific type didn't really matter to him, attempting to steer the conversation away from potentially revealing too much game knowledge. Erika, however, misinterpreted his dismissal. Her expression cooled as she asked if his lack of interest in the tree meant he had no genuine interest in her family, only in the political advantages of the union. Hirasawa mentally cursed. He was aware from the game that Erika was intelligent and perceptive. He tried to salvage the situation, awkwardly telling her she could interpret his words however she wished, essentially digging himself deeper. His clumsy response clearly failed to impress the young woman, who already seemed predisposed to dislike him. likely influenced by Harold's notorious reputation. She voiced her suspicion that he only desired her family's name and status, an idea sparked in Hirasawa's mind. Perhaps cultivating her dislike was the safer path. If she hated him, she'd be less likely to develop attachments that could interfere with her eventual meeting with Liner. Leaning into Harold's established arrogance, he unleashed a volley of calculated insults. He scoffed that his own Stokes lineage, with its noble blood, far surpassed the Sumiura name. He reminded her cruelly that her family had come crawling to his, begging for financial aid, clearly establishing their inferior position. The words struck home. Erika's expression transformed into the iciest glare Hirasawa had ever witnessed, making him momentarily fear he had gone too far. He needed her dislike, not her outright murderous rage, which could create entirely new, unpredictable death flags. To de-escalate and shift focus, he produced an envelope from his pocket, the one containing his research on the miasma antidote. He offered it to her, instructing her to give it to her father, Tasuku. Erika, still radiating fury, initially refused, stating she wouldn't do anything for him. Knowing he needed the letter delivered, Harold resorted to threats, darkly hinting at the suffering her people would endure if she failed to deliver this potential solution. The mention of her people's plight seemed to penetrate her anger. After a moment's tense consideration, weighing her distrust against the possibility of aid, she hesitantly took the envelope, especially after Harold added that she could judge his trustworthiness based on the results. It was a gamble, but the letter was now in her hands. Soon after, Harold returned to the Stokes estate. Norman greeted him, suggesting he rest after the journey, but Hirasawa immediately pivoted back to business, inquiring about the progress of the LP farming trials. Norman reported positive news. The farmers involved were receptive. Usable fields had been secured without issue, and the initial trials were set to begin within 10 days. Harold instructed Norman to continue relying on Jake's expertise for the agricultural aspects. Things seemed to be progressing smoothly on that front, and crucially, his parents remained oblivious to his clandestine activities. For now, he could afford to wait and observe the Sumiura family's response to his letter. He felt confident Erika, driven by her loyalty to her people, would deliver the envelope to Tasuku. The letter contained not just the formula for a makeshift antibiotic effective against the miasma, but also Hirasawa's calculated estimation of the contamination's range, derived from cross-referencing game maps with Norman's territorial data. He knew it wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a start, a gesture of goodwill designed to gain Tasuku's trust and, more importantly, motivate Erika towards her eventual path as a healer, a path crucial for the protagonist's party. The lingering question was whether Tasuku, a pragmatic leader, would actually trust the contents of a letter delivered by the notoriously arrogant 10-year-old Harold Stokes and invest resources in producing the antibiotic. If this plan failed, Hirasawa would need a contingency approach. But for now, Erika taking the letter was a significant step. A few days later, Harold was engaged in swordsmanship training, this time with one of the Stokes' household soldiers. The soldier, terrified of accidentally harming the young master and facing Hayden's wrath, was clearly holding back, making the session utterly useless. Harold's frustration mounted. How could he improve if his sparring partners were too afraid to fight properly? His internal monologue about needing a real challenge was interrupted by Norman announcing an unexpected visitor. Erika Sumiura had returned. A mix of anxiety and curiosity churned within Hirasawa as he made his way to the visitor's room. Why was she back so soon? Had Tasuku rejected the letter? Or worse, had something gone wrong? He entered the room and, defaulting to Harold's bluntness, immediately demanded to know the reason for her visit, forgoing any customary pleasantries. Erika, who had perhaps expected an apology for being kept waiting, seemed momentarily taken aback by his rudeness, but quickly composed herself. She stated it was her fault for arriving unannounced. Getting straight to the point, she expressed profound gratitude on behalf of her family. The antibiotic described in his letter had worked. They had already managed to save many citizens suffering from the miasma. Tasuku had acted much faster than Hirasawa anticipated. Maintaining Harold's arrogant facade, he made a dismissive remark about her family jumping at a bootleg remedy. Erika impressively kept her composure, even when Harold mentioned expecting some form of compensation for his generosity. He further downplayed his contribution, reminding her that the letter contained only a makeshift solution, potentially with side effects, and wouldn't cure severe cases. He added callously that he had no intention of caring further for her people. He had done enough. Erica acknowledged his perspective, agreeing their engagement was purely political. As long as the Stokes family maintained face by appearing benevolent, her family gained some standing. Yet, she confessed she couldn't stop wondering why he had helped them at all. The speed at which he produced the remedy was unbelievable, making her question when he had even started developing it. How could he, a 10-year-old boy notorious for cruelty, achieve something her entire family, with all their resources, had struggled with for so long? She then produced another letter, this one from her father, Tasuku. Harold accepted the letter and read it quickly. Tasuku expressed sincere gratitude multiple times, updated him on the patient's progress, and then made an unexpected request. He asked if Erica could stay at the Stokes estate for a while, under Harold's care, while the Sumiura family dealt with the ongoing miasma crisis back home. Erica looked genuinely surprised. She hadn't been aware of this part of her father's plan. She immediately pointed out the inconvenience this would cause Harold. Complicating matters, the coach that brought her had already departed, leaving her stranded. With a hint of cleverness, she remarked that her only option was to rely on his benevolence. Harold couldn't help but crack a small internal smile at her gutsy maneuver. Outwardly, however, he maintained his cold demeanor, declaring there was no honor in fulfilling such a one-sided request, and complaining about not being repaid for his initial help. He intended to make her leave. Erica, accepting his refusal, prepared to depart. But her swift exit triggered a nagging worry in Hirasawa. He had a bad feeling. His unease proved prophetic. Mere hours after Erica left the mansion, Hayden summoned Harold, informing him, not asking, that Erica would be staying with them for several weeks as their guest. It was a direct order from his father, likely orchestrated politically behind the scenes, leaving Harold no room to refuse. Hirasawa cursed internally. His attempt to push Erica away had backfired spectacularly, thanks to parental interference likely motivated by strengthening the political ties. His letter, intended to subtly help, had caused a significant deviation, forcing Erica into close proximity. Worse still, Hayden assigned Harold the responsibility of showing Erica around the town the next day. He was now inextricably linked with her, a situation fraught with potential complications for his long-term plans. The next day, Harold went to pick up Erica. Alongside her came her attendant, Yuno, a new character Hirasawa didn't recall from the game, adding another layer of unpredictability. He resolved to ignore them both as much as possible, instructing them to mind their own business, though Hayden's public announcements of his fiancée's arrival made any attempt at discretion futile. Meanwhile, back at the Sumiura estate, Tasuku pondered the mysterious letter from Harold. He couldn't fathom the Stokes family having anything to gain by revealing a potential cure that could strengthen the Sumiura. The letter hinted at knowledge far beyond a 10-year-old's grasp, making Tasuku suspect external influence. Was someone manipulating Harold? Was it a test? The sheer detail and potential efficacy of the proposed remedy suggested it was likely truthful, regardless of the source's motive. Trusting the potential benefit over the puzzling circumstances, Tasuku ordered his retainer, Kiru, to immediately begin preparations for producing the antibiotic using volunteer efforts. Dinner at the Stokes mansion became an exercise in awkward tension. Erica and Yuno joined the family, enjoying the lavish meal while Harold radiated misery. Jessica, noticing his sullen mood, fussed over him, checking for a fever, much to his embarrassment, being treated like a child in front of guests. His parents chuckled at his blushing reaction until Harold retorted sharply, pointing out their own embarrassing, lovey-dovey behavior. An awkward silence descended, eventually broken as the dinner concluded. Later, in her assigned room, Erica confided in Yuno. Her father suspected Harold might be connected to a traitor within the Stokes family, or was being manipulated. While Harold didn't seem easily controlled, the mystery surrounding the letter and the antibiotic was too significant to ignore. Erica felt they needed concrete proof to understand the threat, if any, that Harold represented. It was then revealed that Yuno wasn't merely an attendant. She was a skilled investigator, tasked by Tasuku to gather intelligence on Harold. Tasuku had instructed Erika to try and rattle Harold during the day, but her efforts had yielded no results. Was he a puppet? Or something else entirely? Yuno prepared to delve deeper, aware that uncovering the truth surrounding the enigmatic Harold Stokes would require careful clandestine effort. The next day, Yuno began her investigation, mingling in the town, gathering local gossip about the Stokes family. The reports confirmed their unpopularity. Arrogant rulers, crushing taxes funding their military might, swift and brutal suppression of any dissent. Then, an informant whispered something intriguing to Yuno, something about Harold that left her shocked and puzzled, yet suddenly alert. Simultaneously, Harold endured the task of showing Erika around town. Despite his internal reluctance, he maintained a facade of bored tolerance. He wasn't familiar with the town himself, having spent most of his time training or studying within the estate. At one shop, perhaps feeling a flicker of obligation or attempting a clumsy gesture, he bought Erika a small token. He noticed her cheeks flush slightly, a reaction that both annoyed and concerned him. He desperately needed her to dislike him, to maintain distance. He knew rumors of him killing Clara were likely circulating, and hoped they would solidify her aversion. Yet, the thought of Clara and Colette, safe but vulnerable, brought a fresh wave of anxiety. If his parents ever discovered his deception, their fury would be immense. Returning to the mansion, Harold met with Jake for an update on the LP farming trials. Jake reported favorable growth in all 6 initial test locations, with harvest yields likely meeting expectations. Harold, already thinking ahead, suggested potential expansion, but Jake highlighted the bottleneck: lack of trustworthy manpower. Norman proposed involving 2 other retainers, Aris and Sane, as inspectors, but Harold felt it wasn't scalable. He briefly considered hiring external personnel, but decided against it for now due to the need for secrecy. Jake continued his report. No adverse side effects from the life potions had been observed on the crops or reported by the chefs regarding taste. It was positive news, but Harold felt they needed more extensive testing before making definitive judgments, instructing Jake to maintain close monitoring. Elsewhere, Yuno also returned from her reconnaissance, delivering her findings to Erika. She confirmed the Stokes' deep unpopularity among the citizenry. More disturbingly, she relayed the prevalent rumor: Harold had indeed used magic to burn Clara to ashes. Hearing this confirmation, even if it was just a rumor Yuno had gathered, devastated Erika. The image of Harold, the boy who had provided a lifeline for her people with the antibiotic, now seemed monstrously intertwined with the act of cold-blooded murder. Despite the hope he represented, this darkness was profoundly unsettling. Yuno, sensing Erika's distress, promised to continue her surveillance, cautioning Erika to avoid being alone with Harold, warning that his true nature remained dangerously unknown. The rumors and Erika's subsequent reaction reached the servant grapevine. Gossip circulated that Lady Erika had fallen ill ever since her outing with Master Harold, a tidbit that would undoubtedly please Harold if he heard it, furthering his goal of alienating her. Meanwhile, Harold sought refuge in his solitary training, practicing swordsmanship in the same remote forest clearing where he had staged Clara's fake execution. Swinging the blade freely, attempting to master the advanced, swift lightning technique described in the game, brought a sense of release. Yet, frustration gnawed at him. His progress felt slow, his skills still leagues behind the original Harold's prowess. This newbie magic, this rudimentary swordplay, it wasn't enough. He felt the pressure of the original character's reputation, the need to match that strength for his own survival. He pushed himself harder, unaware he was being watched. Yuno, hidden amongst the trees, observed Harold's training session. She witnessed not raw power, but struggle, repeated attempts, and frustration. She saw him practice sword techniques without the magical augmentation the rumors implied he possessed. This discrepancy struck her as significant. If he couldn't seamlessly blend magic and swordsmanship as the stories claimed, was he hiding something? A weakness? Or perhaps a different kind of secret altogether? She knew confronting him directly was risky. If he perceived her as a threat, she likely wouldn't survive the encounter. Deciding discretion was the better part of valor, she turned to leave, planning to report her observations, and perhaps return later. Before she could slip away unseen, a sword whistled past her head, embedding itself in a nearby tree trunk. Harold had detected her. Panic seized Yuno, Had he seen through her spying? Could she lie her way out of this? Her fear subsided slightly when Harold approached, his expression more concerned than angry. He hadn't thrown the sword. It had apparently slipped from his grasp during a complex maneuver. He seemed genuinely worried he might have injured her, relieved to find her unharmed, though clearly startled. He curtly advised her against lurking in the shadows, a clear warning disguised as concern. Yuno, playing along, apologized profusely for accidentally stumbling upon his private training. Internally, however, her assessment of Harold shifted. He wasn't just arrogant, he possessed sharp senses and potentially lethal skills, even if his technique seemed unrefined compared to the rumors. Protecting Erica from this enigmatic, dangerous boy seemed increasingly challenging. He was no mere puppet. His abilities were real, his secrets likely deep and complex. It felt like a defeat for her investigation. Changing the subject abruptly, Harold inquired about Erica's prolonged illness, suggesting perhaps she should return home if she was so homesick. His tone was dismissive, bordering on callous. Yuno wished he would show more kindness towards his fiancée, but Harold bluntly stated he had no intention of being tied down by the engagement. Realizing he had perhaps said too much, revealing his true feelings about the betrothal, he turned and left Yuno standing alone in the woods, his mind still troubled by the nagging suspicion that Erica's illness was more than just homesickness. Something deeper was amiss. As he walked away, Harold mentally kicked himself. He'd left his practice sword back in the clearing where Yuno stood. Hoping she wouldn't tamper with it, he quickly retraced his steps. Approaching the clearing again, he spotted Erica herself, wandering through the gardens adjacent to the woods. She seemed mobile enough, contradicting the reports of severe illness. Was she feigning? Or had she recovered? Perhaps he should escort her back to her room. He approached her, but his attempt at concern morphed as usual into Harold's default mode: insult. He commented snidely on her apparent recovery. Erica didn't even flinch, her face remaining passive. She stated quietly that she couldn't be honest with him because she disliked him too much. Her words delivered with a chilling calmness. Her stillness, her lack of reaction, unnerved him slightly. Just as he turned to leave, frustrated by the unproductive encounter, she stopped him. Her voice, though quiet, held a new intensity. She asked him directly, point blank, were the rumors true? Did he magically burn a servant to death? Hirasawa felt a jolt of panic. This was a direct confrontation he hadn't anticipated. He needed to maintain the illusion, reinforce Harold's villainy, to keep his parents unsuspecting and potentially push Erica further away. He decided to lean into the monstrous persona, confirming the rumors with chilling indifference. He claimed he had killed the servant and her daughter, adding callously that the lives of mere servants were insignificant. He let out a cold, forced laugh, boasting about the murders, stating it was their own fault for being born inferior. His words, deliberately cruel and insensitive, finally broke through Erica's composure. The impact was immediate and visceral. Her hand flashed out, connecting sharply with his cheek. The slap echoed in the quiet garden. Her eyes blazed with righteous fury as she accused him of being the worst kind of human imaginable, before turning sharply and storming away, leaving Harold stunned, the imprint of her hand stinging on his face. Later, locked in his room, Hirasawa replayed the encounter. The slap hadn't physically hurt much, but it resonated deeply. He hadn't even been able to console himself by playing with Zen when the boy came knocking earlier, sending his friend away curtly. Zen had sensed something was wrong, but Harold refused to confide, pushing the boy out. Alone, Hirasawa acknowledged the harshness of his words to Erica. He had intended to push her away, solidify his terrible reputation, but perhaps he had gone too far, especially considering her recent, real or feigned, illness. A pang of guilt, unfamiliar and unwelcome, surfaced. He felt bad for projecting such negativity, for deliberately causing her pain. Yet, he reminded himself, this brutal facade was necessary. It was the role he had to play, the shield he needed to maintain. Hesitation now would only make future deceptions harder, potentially leading to fatal mistakes. He had to commit to being Harold Stokes, the villain, even if it meant crushing the empathy that Kazuki still felt flickering within him. Sleep offered little respite that night. Hirasawa tossed and turned, haunted by Erica's slap and the weight of his necessary cruelty. When morning finally arrived, the bright sunlight streaming through the window revealed he had overslept drastically. It was well past noon, The lingering sting of the slap, both physical and emotional, seemed to have taken a heavier toll than he had realized. Rubbing his face, sighing deeply, he forced himself out of bed. Everything was proceeding according to his plan. Clara was safe, his parents were unsuspecting, Erica likely hated him now. So why did he feel so profoundly bothered? He admitted that any player watching this scene unfold in the game would have cheered Erica on. Harold absolutely deserved that slap. But experiencing it firsthand, being the recipient of that righteous anger, felt entirely different, unsettlingly real. His rumbling stomach finally drove him towards the dining room. Norman met him there, expressing concern over his master sleeping so late and looking unusually fatigued. Hirasawa, however, brushed off the personal inquiries, immediately shifting the conversation to business, his default coping mechanism. He needed to focus on strategy, not confusing emotions. He launched into a discussion with Norman about expanding the LP farming method. Recruiting external manpower seemed too risky given the need for secrecy. His new idea involved demonstrating the method's benefits to carefully selected merchants, then licensing the rights to them through contracts. These merchants would then act as intermediaries, reselling the technique to farmers. The farmers would pay contract fees to the merchants, who would then split the profits with Harold as the inventor. The challenge lay in finding trustworthy, smaller-scale merchants who wouldn't immediately run to his parents or try to exploit the system excessively. Relying on large, established companies connected to his parents was out of the question. Norman acknowledged the difficulty, pointing out their lack of existing connections. Reputable merchants wouldn't likely entertain a proposal from the infamous and very young Harold Stokes out of the blue. Frustration flickered across Hirasawa's face. Even with Harold's resources, navigating the established economic and social structures was proving complex, especially while maintaining secrecy. Norman, sensing his master's discouragement, offered reassurance. They would consult Jake, leveraging his connections and financial acumen to identify potential merchant partners. It was a viable path forward. Hirasawa nodded, agreeing to that course of action. Later that day, Zen bounced up to Harold's door, knocking persistently. Receiving no answer after several minutes, concern replaced his usual cheerfulness. Worrying that Harold might be overworking himself again, Zen cautiously entered the room, only to find it empty. He correctly guessed Harold was likely out training in the woods again. Zen's attachment to Harold was evident. He even admitted to waking up earlier, just hoping to spend a few moments with the often prickly young master. As Zen turned to leave, he spotted Erica sitting alone in the main living area, looking pensive. Respectfully greeting her and introducing himself, perhaps forgetting they'd indirectly met via the servant grapevine, Zen noticed Yuno wasn't with her. Erica explained that Yuno was out of town on a personal matter. Zen, incapable of minding his own business, immediately asked if Erica was staying because she had business with Harold. At the mention of Harold's name, the faint hint of a smile vanished from Erica's face, replaced by a colder expression. Zen, completely missing the social cue, continued rambling about how worried he was about Harold pushing himself too hard lately. Erica remained silent, her gaze fixed on him with an unreadable intensity. Eventually, Zen, sensing the awkwardness but not understanding its source, asked if something was wrong. Erica hesitated, then, mustering her courage, posed a direct question. Did Zen admire Harold so highly simply because he was unaware of the rumor? The rumor that Harold had used magic to murder a servant? Zen was caught completely off guard. He stammered, scratched his head, and tried to downplay it, insisting they were just rumors and they shouldn't jump to conclusions. Erica's voice rose, sharp with conviction. She stated flatly that Harold himself had confirmed the rumors to her face. She challenged Zen, asking how he could remain so careless, so loyal, knowing what Harold had admitted to, especially since Zen himself had been present, as the guard escorting Clara away, during the events surrounding Clara's disappearance. Zen froze, realizing he had inadvertently implicated himself, or at least revealed his proximity to the event. Erica pressed further, her voice trembling with emotion. How could she blindly follow Harold like Zen did? Her conscience wouldn't allow her to accept or forgive someone who had taken a human life. She confessed that, although she was his fiancée and desperately wanted to help her people, this was a moral line she couldn't overlook. Harold's actions, or rather, his confessed actions, had destroyed the one path she saw to being useful to her family, marrying him. Tears began to stream down her face as her carefully controlled composure finally broke. She cried out that the only thing consuming her mind was her inability to forgive him, no matter the political or personal cost. Zen stood dumbfounded, like a deer caught in headlights, utterly unable to respond to her passionate outburst. After a few moments, Erika regained control, apologizing for her emotional display. Acknowledging it was unbecoming of a noble. Wiping her tears, she excused herself, leaving Zen alone with his thoughts. He mulled over her words, contrasting them with what he knew, or thought he knew, about Harold. He recalled Harold secretly arranging Clara's escape, bearing the dishonor of a murderer to protect her and her child. He saw a parallel between Harold's hidden sacrifice and Erika's struggle, her attempt to swallow her true feelings for the sake of her people. These two individuals, both carrying heavy burdens, both possessing a hidden strength and kindness beneath their respective facades, arrogance for Harold, duty for Erika, seemed remarkably similar. A conviction formed in Zen's mind. These two shouldn't be driven apart by misunderstanding and hatred. They should be supporting each other, showing their true selves. In a misguided but well-intentioned attempt to play matchmaker and alleviate Harold's perceived loneliness, Zen decided to intervene, ignoring Harold's explicit orders for secrecy regarding Clara. He feared Harold would eventually shatter under the weight of his secrets and couldn't bear to witness it. He caught up to Erika just as she was leaving the main hall. Apologizing internally to Harold for betraying his trust, Zen urged Erika to follow him, claiming he had something important to show her regarding Harold. His plan was impulsive and potentially disastrous. Lead Erika to Harold's room, push her inside, and lock the door, forcing them to confront each other and hopefully clear the air. He executed the first part, ushering a confused Erika towards Harold's chambers. With a mischievous grin, he was about to spring the trap when fate intervened in the form of Harold himself, casually returning to his room. Zen nearly jumped out of his skin. Harold, oblivious, simply asked Zen what he was doing loitering outside his door. Zen stammered, trying to appear nonchalant, while Harold eyed him suspiciously, looking like a particularly grumpy cat. Unbeknownst to Harold, Erika, in a moment of panic instigated by Zen's strange behavior, had ducked into Harold's large wardrobe just seconds before he opened the door. She was now trapped, her heart pounding against her ribs, praying she wouldn't be discovered. Zen, thinking quickly to salvage his botched plan and perhaps still achieve his goal indirectly, launched into a new line of questioning. He asked Harold about the rumors concerning Clara, claiming they were spreading like wildfire in town and damaging Harold's reputation. He recounted, truthfully this time, how shopkeepers had pestered him about it. Erika, hidden in the closet, listened intently. Harold sighed, annoyed by Zen's persistence, but seeing an opportunity to reinforce the necessary narrative, he stated dismissively that the rumors didn't matter because there was nothing he could do. Zen, playing his part perfectly, or perhaps genuinely concerned, pressed further, asking why he couldn't do anything. And then, Harold revealed the truth, the fabricated truth meant for public consumption, but devastatingly misleading for the eavesdropping Erika. He stated flatly that he couldn't publicly announce Clara and Colette had safely escaped to Blosh Village and were still alive. Erika gasped silently in the darkness of the wardrobe. Alive? Escaped? Harold continued, explaining that if his parents caught wind of Clara still being alive, he would become the target of their suspicion. It was a calculated statement, partially true about the danger from his parents, but utterly false about Clara's fate as Erika understood it. Zen then asked the crucial question, the one designed perhaps for Erika's benefit. Why wasn't Harold willing to reveal the real truth, Clara's escape, to his fiancée Erika, who was clearly suffering due to the rumors of murder? Harold's response was sharp, immediate, and brutally effective in achieving his goal of alienating Erika, though unintentionally confirming her deepest hopes. Erika must never find out, he declared emphatically. Hirasawa, knowing Zen's kindness could lead to disastrous leaks if he wasn't given a convincing, albeit false, reason, elaborated. He claimed Erika's emotional reaction, crying over the supposed murders, proved she was too soft, a liability. He didn't want someone shedding tears of sympathy for insignificant servants. Her kindness, he stated coldly, was a weakness. She would only get hurt if she stayed by his side. Zen attempted to reframe it, asking if Harold was deliberately pushing her away out of concern for her safety. But Harold doubled down on the cruelty, stating emphatically that he would never marry such an annoying girl who cried over everything. Zen, persistent, questioned the point of the engagement if marriage was off the table. Harold, calling Zen a numbskull, explained the cold political reality. The engagement was bought with money, a transaction born from the Sumiura's desperation due to the miasma plague. He revealed his knowledge of the Sumiura's economic crisis, information gleaned from the game, explaining his parents readily agreed to the prestigious match, desperate to secure a connection to the respected Sumiura bloodline. Zen, still playing devil's advocate or perhaps genuinely slow on the uptake, asked if Harold was okay with the Sumiura family being destroyed if he broke the engagement. Harold smirked, revealing he had already taken countermeasures. He explained he had passed the letter with the antibody formula to Tasuku via Erika during his visit. He detailed how the antibody could combat the miasma in lightly contaminated areas, potentially restoring their forest industry. He further revealed, shocking Erika in the closet again, that he also planned to offer them the LP farming technique, mentioning he had hinted at it in the letter as well. With both the antibody and the advanced farming method, the Sumiura family would be economically secure, allowing Harold to break the engagement without causing their ruin. Erika, hidden but hearing everything, felt a whirlwind of emotions: shock, confusion, relief, and a dawning understanding of the complex, contradictory boy she was engaged to. Harold then advised Zen to consider his own future, warning that the Stokes family itself was headed for a downfall due to unsustainable finances and his parents' tyranny. He should prepare for the worst. Zen panicked, asking if Harold had given any thought to the Stokes' citizens. Harold scoffed arrogantly, revealing yet another layer of his contingency planning. He had requested Tasuku, through the letter, to take care of the Stokes citizens should the family collapse, leveraging Tasuku's connections to the royal family for support. The sheer breadth and depth of Harold's long-term planning, orchestrated by a 10-year-old, or rather, Hirasawa, within him, was staggering. After revealing his intricate schemes, Harold gave Zen a death stare, warning him again about secrecy and commanding him to leave. Zen, however, still needed to get Harold out of the room so Erika could escape the closet. He feigned a sudden interest in swordsmanship, asking Harold to demonstrate his training techniques. Harold initially refused, but then realized Zen could serve as a very reluctant sparring partner. A familiar devilish grin spread across Harold's face as he handed Zen a practice sword and told him to run for his life. As the duo exited the room, presumably heading for the training grounds, Erika stumbled out of the closet, breathing heavily, her mind reeling from the revelations. She rushed back to her own room, Harold's words echoing. Clara and Colette were alive, saved by him, yet he deliberately cultivated a monstrous reputation, pushed her away seemingly for her own protection, and had meticulously planned for contingencies she couldn't have imagined. Tears, this time of relief and overwhelming confusion, welled in her eyes, but she needed confirmation. She immediately sought out Yuno upon her return, relaying everything she had overheard. Erika explained to Yuno how Harold's confession made sense of the antibiotic's sudden appearance. It wasn't developed in days. He must have predicted the Sumiura crisis years in advance, preparing the remedy long before the engagement was even proposed. But why? Why expend such effort on a drug that seemingly offered him no personal gain? Yuno, recalling her own encounter with Harold in the woods, his sharp senses, his veiled threats, considered Erika's story. Could Harold have known Erika was in the closet? Was the entire conversation with Zen orchestrated for her benefit? The more they thought about him, the more enigmatic and unfathomably complex Harold Stokes became. Yuno found his fearsome intelligence and hidden depths strangely compelling. 3 weeks passed. Erika and Yuno had now been guests at the Stokes estate for a month. Harold, burdened by his secrets and the stress of managing multiple complex plans, looked visibly exhausted, suspecting something was still off about Erika's presence, but unable to pinpoint it. Norman interrupted his brooding, informing him that Hayden wished to see him. His father delivered the news. Erika, supposedly still not fully recovered, would be returning to the Sumiura territory. Accompanied by Yuno, Harold felt a surge of internal relief. Finally, she would be gone. He barely managed to contain it, telling his father he was glad he wouldn't have to see her face again. Hayden lightly scolded him for his rudeness, then dropped the other shoe. Harold was ordered to escort Erika back to the Sumiura estate. Furthermore, he was to stay there for a while to deepen their relationship, with Hayden explicitly commanding him to get intimate with his fiancée and secure the marriage. Hirasawa felt a wave of pure annoyance, bordering on panic. This was the exact opposite of what he wanted. More forced proximity, more pressure to advance a relationship he needed to eventually dissolve. Then, a strategic thought cut through the frustration. A prolonged stay in Sumiura territory offered a prime opportunity. He could personally oversee the implementation of the LP farming method, discuss the business aspects directly with Tasuku, and solidify their alliance, an alliance crucial for his long-term survival plans, and potentially for countering Justice's schemes. Business, strategy, survival. These thoughts quickly overshadowed his personal discomfort. His mind was already calculating the possibilities. Meanwhile, far away in the peaceful Blosh village, Clara was settling into her new life. 5 months had passed since her harrowing escape. Washing clothes by the river, the tranquil scenery a stark contrast to the oppressive Stokes mansion, she found her thoughts drifting back to Harold, the terrifying yet enigmatic boy who had shown her unexpected mercy. She shook her head, pushing the thoughts away. She had no connection to that life anymore. Her existence depended on remaining hidden. She chatted briefly with a neighbor whose son, Linner, was apparently becoming fast friends with Colette, the original storyline subtly reasserting itself. As Clara headed back to prepare cookies for the children, she was intercepted by a stranger, a man with an unnervingly intense gaze. He didn't introduce himself, but immediately asked if she knew anything about Harold Stokes, specifically inquiring about the rumors of him murdering a servant. Clara froze, sensing danger. Any response could compromise her safety, and potentially Harold's. She turned away curtly, telling him to leave, but the man promised ominously that he would return. A chill ran down Clara's spine. She prayed that Hayden Stokes wouldn't discover the truth and bring harm to the boy who had saved her. Back in the Sumiura territory, Harold arrived as Erika's escort. Tasuku greeted him warmly, but Harold, no longer needing to maintain appearances for his parents, immediately dropped the respectful facade. He addressed Tasuku with characteristic arrogance, calling him a loser and demanding he make time in his schedule to discuss business. Tasuku, however, remained unfazed, maintaining his composure, perhaps already accustomed to Harold's difficult personality from Erika and Yuno's reports. Later, Yuno delivered her final report to Tasuku regarding her investigation at the Stokes estate, including her analysis of Harold. She admitted she hadn't uncovered conclusive evidence of manipulation or betrayal, only layers of complexity and deliberate obfuscation. This lack of clarity only reinforced the idea that Harold was meticulously controlling the flow of information around him. It was then revealed that the persistent stranger who had questioned Clara in Blosh village was, in fact, an operative hired by Yuno. The operative reported back, a woman named Clara was indeed alive and well in Blosh, but she refused to divulge any information regarding Harold Stokes. Yuno, needing definitive proof, decided she would have to visit Blosh village herself. Hirasawa, now situated within the Sumiura estate, felt a sense of cautious optimism. His plans seemed to be progressing. The miasma, according to the game's timeline, wouldn't be fully dealt with until Lina arrived 8 years later. However, by allying with Tasuku now, Hirasawa could potentially provide indirect support to the future protagonist from the shadows, making it easier to navigate his own death flags while ensuring the main quest remained on track. The immediate hurdle was finalizing the LP farming partnership with Tasuku. He needed to make a convincing proposal, but crucially, he had to do it while maintaining Harold's abrasive personality. During their meeting, Harold unceremoniously slammed the LP farming manuscript onto Tasuku's desk, demanding his assessment. Tasuku reviewed the documents, his eyes widening at the projected figures and the ingenuity of the method. Yet, the question lingered. What was Harold's angle? What did he gain from sharing such a revolutionary technique? Harold posed a hypothetical question. What would Tasuku do if he had sole control of the LP farming method? Tasuku thoughtfully replied that he would implement it locally first, ensuring its stability, and then gradually spread the technology throughout the country for the benefit of all, explicitly stating he had no intention of monopolizing it. This was the answer Hirasawa needed. Harold gave a curt nod of satisfaction. He then formally proposed that Tasuku become the joint developer and public face of the LP farming method. Tasuku looked at the boy, recalling Yuno's description. Smart, cunning, business-minded, yet harboring hidden depths. He quickly deduced Harold's strategy. Harold needed the respected Sumiura name and Tasuku's political clout to disseminate the farming method effectively, bypassing his own greedy parents who would try to seize control if they knew he was the inventor. Harold confirmed Tasuku's unspoken deduction, stating 2 reasons for choosing him. Firstly, Tasuku was honorable and relatively easy to deal with, a typically insulting Harold compliment. Tasuku guessed the second reason himself. By providing the miasma cure, the defense strategy, and the LP farming method, Harold was effectively giving the Sumiura family the means to thrive independently, thereby creating the conditions necessary to eventually break off the engagement with Erika without causing political or economic fallout for her family. It was a multifaceted, long-term strategy designed to secure allies, improve regional stability, reducing future conflict-related death flags, and subtly manipulate events towards his own survival and the preservation of the main storyline, all while paving the way to dissolve the unwanted betrothal. For Tasuku, the offer was irresistible. It promised salvation for his people and secured his daughter's future freedom. He readily agreed to the partnership. Harold instructed him to begin establishing a large company to manage the distribution and implementation of the LP farming method. With the business side delegated, Harold declared his intention to focus on honing his combat skills. Later, luxuriating in a hot bath, a custom absent in the Stokes territory but embraced by the Sumiura Hirasawa, allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The alliance with Tasuku was secured, seemingly smoother than anticipated. Tasuku seemed to view him as a challenging but potentially valuable sparring partner, both intellectually and politically. Things were progressing well, almost too well, Hirasawa thought with a flicker of unease, but pushed the worry aside. Unbeknownst to him, Yuno had requested an urgent private meeting with Tasuku, Erika, and Erika's mother. Erika, looking resolute, confessed to her parents that she had ordered Yuno to investigate Harold, apologizing for mobilizing spies without permission, but stating she needed to verify something critical. Tasuku and his wife listened intently as Erika asked if they knew the rumors of Harold murdering a servant. Tasuku confirmed he'd heard reports. Erika then dropped the bombshell. The rumors were false. She explained her investigation, leading to Yuno's involvement. Yuno took over the narrative, detailing her operative's initial failure to get information from Clara and her own subsequent journey to Blosh village. She described how she had approached Clara, introducing herself as a messenger from the Sumiura family, explaining the predicament, the engagement hampered by murder suspicions. She strategically mentioned that Harold himself seemed resigned to the stigma, pleading guilty by silence. This emotional manipulation worked. Yuno had promised Clara that if she revealed the truth, they could find secret supporters for Harold, protecting him from the shadows without public exposure. Convinced of Yuno's sincerity and desire to help Harold, Clara invited her inside and recounted the entire story. Harold's secret plan, the escape, the provision of funds and resources, his deliberate acceptance of the murderer label to protect her and Colette from his parents. The revelation hung heavy in the room. Tasuku, his wife, Erika, and Yuno were all stunned by the depth of Harold's sacrifice, his willingness to destroy his own reputation to save others. Erika, overwhelmed with guilt and shame, stood abruptly, declaring she had to apologize to Harold immediately. She had misjudged him horribly, lashed out physically, all without knowing the truth. The guilt was consuming her. Tasuku stopped her gently but firmly. He explained that knowing the truth now imposed a new responsibility, not to expose Harold's secret, but to carefully preserve it. Revealing their knowledge could make Harold even more cautious, more isolated, potentially destroying the fragile trust they were beginning to build. He challenged Erika, asking if her desire to apologize stemmed from genuine remorse or simply a need to alleviate her own guilt. He then offered her a different path to redemption: become Harold's supporter. He pointed out that Harold's brilliance often alienated him, leaving him fighting lonely battles. If she truly wanted to make amends, she should strive to get closer to him, understand his goals, and become someone he could truly rely on, even if he never acknowledged her efforts due to his guarded nature. He cautioned her it would be difficult, demanding unwavering resolve. He gave her time to consider, allowing her to observe Harold further before deciding. However, he did concede she should probably apologize for the slap itself. Erica, her eyes filled with a newfound determination, nodded and quickly left the room, her mind now set on a different kind of mission, understanding and supporting the complex boy she was engaged to. Tasuku watched her go, commenting to his wife that their daughter had truly grown, her feelings for Harold now tangled in a web far more complex than simple dislike. The next day, Tasuku arranged for Harold to train at the largest martial arts temple in the Sumiura territory, intending to expose him to different combat styles. He mentioned Harold's opponent for the day had insisted Erica be present. Harold, pointedly ignoring Erica, who stood nearby, asked Tasuku who his opponent was. Just then, a young man burst into the dojo, bypassed Tasuku entirely, and enveloped Erica in an overly enthusiastic hug. This was Itsuki Sumiura, Erica's older brother, a character Hirasawa vaguely recalled being mentioned but never shown in the game. Itsuki effusively declared how much he missed Erica, how beautiful she'd become, practically suffocating her with affection. Harold looked on, annoyed not by jealousy, but by the sheer absurdity and perceived weakness of his apparent opponent. Tasuku reassured Harold that Itsuki's strength was genuine, despite his eccentric behavior. Itsuki finally released Erica and introduced himself to Harold as her older brother, his demeanor shifting slightly, a competitive glint in his eye. Harold offered only his name in return, which seemed to irk Itsuki. In a flash, Itsuki closed the distance, clapping a deceptively strong hand on Harold's shoulder, reminding him pointedly that Harold was his little sister's fiancé. The intense stare and wide grin held a clear challenge. Hirasawa recognized the underlying strength. This brother was likely more formidable than he appeared. Trainees gathered, eager to witness the renowned Itsuki spar with the infamous visitor. Itsuki tossed Harold a bamboo practice sword. Harold tested its weight, finding it surprisingly light compared to the iron sword he usually trained with, perhaps a result of his growing strength or Harold's inherent power. He assessed Itsuki again. This was an unknown variable, a character outside the main game script, potentially strong and personally invested in Erica's well-being. Underestimation was not an option. Hirasawa drew upon Harold's latent combat instincts, reminding himself of his training and the body's superior speed. Tasuku outlined the rules. Bamboo swords only, no vital strikes, head, face, no magic, no time limit, victory by incapacitation or forfeit. Harold scoffed at the lenient rules. Itsuki, sensing his father's caution about injuring a noble guest, initially offered Harold the first move, a handicap. Harold, annoyed by the condescension, simply waited. As soon as Tasuku signaled the start, Harold exploded forward with blinding speed, catching Itsuki completely off guard. Before Itsuki could fully react, Harold executed a precise strike, not aimed to injure, but to disarm. Itsuki's bamboo sword clattered to the floor. The crowd gasped. Harold stood over him, a smirk playing on his lips, remarking that if it were a real duel, Itsuki would be dead. Itsuki's initial shock turned into excited amusement. He retrieved his sword, acknowledging Harold's surprising strength and skill. He recognized Harold hadn't aimed to win cheaply, but to send a message: fight seriously. Itsuki apologized for underestimating him and proposed a real match. Harold readily agreed, eager for a genuine challenge. Itsuki attacked first this time, his movements fluid and experienced. Harold initially relied on his superior speed, but Itsuki expertly read his patterns, forcing Harold onto the defensive. Harold found himself struggling to keep up with Itsuki's technique and predictive ability, honed by years of experience. The crowd chanted Itsuki's name as he pressed his advantage. The fight intensified, a blur of clashing bamboo, taunts, and skillful maneuvers. Itsuki gained the upper hand, cornering Harold. In a desperate, unexpected move, Harold tossed his sword into the air, momentarily distracting Itsuki, then closed the distance and struck Itsuki hard with his fist, sending him sprawling. Tasuku called a halt to the match. Harold stood victorious, but pointed out that he had technically broken the rules by using his fist, thus forfeiting. Itsuki, however, laughed heartily. impressed by Harold's skill and tenacity, declaring he'd found both a rival and a brother-in-law. Harold typically responded with a tantrum and stormed off. He wandered into a quiet garden, the familiar sight of cherry blossoms reminding him painfully of his lost life in Japan. The weight of his situation crashed down. The looming death sentence 8 years away, the uncertainty of ever returning home, the fading memories of his previous existence. Overwhelmed, tears unexpectedly pricked his eyes. He quickly tried to suppress them. The real Harold wouldn't cry, but it was too late. Erica had followed him and witnessed his moment of vulnerability. Seeing the arrogant, supposedly self-sufficient Harold Stokes crying alone stirred something in her. She softly called his name. Instantly, the mask slammed back into place. Harold rounded on her, demanding to know what nonsense she wanted now. Erica, however, didn't react to his hostility. Instead, she bowed deeply and apologized sincerely for slapping him. Hirasawa was taken aback. This wasn't the reaction he expected or wanted. Her kindness, her genuine remorse, threatened to undermine his carefully constructed defenses. Panic flared. Was this another death flag? He lashed out verbally, calling her horrendous names, declaring her an eyesore, before fleeing the garden, leaving Erica standing there, her expression a mixture of hurt and resolute concern. 3 years passed. Harold, now 13, immersed himself in grueling subjugation campaigns, battling monsters across the land, honing his combat skills relentlessly. He gained a reputation for ruthless efficiency, often single-handedly defeating powerful beasts while his assigned comrades watched in awe. He sometimes also pushed himself to the brink, even suffering severe injuries while protecting others, but always threatening silence to prevent word from reaching his parents or compromising his tough image. And also during those 3 years, the LP farming method, managed diligently by Tasuku, became a resounding success, stabilizing the Sumiura economy and subtly strengthening Harold's political position through their silent partnership. After a particularly arduous campaign, Harold decided to stop by the Sumiura estate to check on the business and perhaps gauge Tasuku's current standing. He arrived looking older, perhaps slightly more mature, though his abrasive personality remained largely intact. He met with Tasuku, immediately demanding updates on the negotiations regarding LP farming fees and taxes with his father, Hayden. Tasuku reported success. Concessions had been made. Harold laughed darkly, remarking how his father remained oblivious that this economic independence was paving the way for the eventual cancellation of the engagement. Tasuku wisely avoided commenting on the engagement, instead expressing concern for Harold's well-being after hearing reports of him fighting a dangerous hornhead monster during the campaign. Harold bristled, taking it as an insult, though Tasuku gently reminded him of previous visits where Harold had arrived severely injured. Tasuku then relayed a message from Itsuki, an invitation for Harold to participate in an upcoming combat tournament in the port town of Delphid. It was divided by age, so he wouldn't face Itsuki directly, but it offered a chance to gain experience against different human opponents. Hirasawa seized the opportunity. A controlled tournament environment was perfect for testing his skills without life-or-death stakes. He agreed readily. Tasuku noted Harold's enthusiasm and finalized the arrangements. Hirasawa felt a sense of accomplishment. His relationship with the Sumiura family, particularly Tasuku, had deepened into a complex but functional alliance. His distance from Erica had also been maintained, a crucial factor in preserving her future path. However, the miasma threat still loomed, and the main story's start was only 5 years away. He couldn't relax yet. Countless death flags still needed pruning. Meanwhile, in the bustling port town of Delphid, the protagonist of Brave Hearts, Liner Griffith, arrived with his father, Orble, and Colette. Liner, now a young teenager, radiated naive excitement, marveling at the large buildings, bustling crowds, and what he mistakenly thought were metal ships. They were bronze statues. Colette, now also a teenager and clearly harboring affection for Liner, fussed over his reckless energy, urging him to hurry with the registration. Liner, however, dashed off impulsively, leaving Orble to handle the paperwork, while asking Colette to keep an eye on his wayward son. While searching frantically for the vanished Liner, Colette stumbled, bruising her knee badly. As bystanders grumbled, a kind hand reached out to help her up. It was Erica Sumiura, also in Delphid, likely accompanying Harold or Itsuki. Colette was immediately struck by Erica's beauty and grace. Erica, concerned, offered to heal the wound. As she tended to Colette's knee using her nascent healing magic, they introduced themselves. Hearing the name Colette, Erica felt a jolt of recognition. When Colette mentioned she was escorting her friend Linner, who hailed from Blosh village and aimed to join the knightly chivalric order, Erica knew it wasn't a coincidence. This was the Colette, the girl Harold had risked everything to save, now intertwined with the protagonist, just as the original story dictated, albeit facilitated by Harold's secret intervention. Erica masked her surprise, finished healing the wound, and politely declined Colette's offer of repayment. Sensing a connection forged by Harold's hidden actions, Erica suggested that if fate brought them together again, they should become friends. Colette readily agreed, touched by the kindness of the beautiful stranger, unaware of the complex web linking their destinies. Later that evening, Itsuki cheerfully collected Harold, announcing he had completed their check-in procedures. He led Harold towards a nearby restaurant, a place bustling with patrons enjoying the evening air. As they stepped inside, however, Harold's steps faltered, his usual composure momentarily replaced by undisguised surprise. Seated at a reserved table was Erica. The pleasant anticipation of a meal dissolved into immediate tension. Erica, equally startled, turned to her brother, her voice tight with confusion. She questioned Itsuki, expressing her belief that she was supposed to be dining solely with him. Itsuki, with feigned innocence, simply remarked that having Harold join them seemed like a good idea, adding playfully that if his presence was truly a problem, he could always leave. The suggestion prompted an immediate panicked reaction from both Harold and Erica. Almost in perfect unison, their voices overlapping, they sharply insisted that Itsuki must stay. Internally, Harold felt a wave of dread. Being trapped in polite conversation alone with Erica sounded like a unique form of torture, fraught with potential missteps. Erica, meanwhile, battled conflicting emotions. While the unexpected proximity to Harold was unwelcome and potentially troublesome, leaving the table now would be a grave breach of etiquette, disrespectful to both Harold and her brother. Itsuki, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrents or perhaps enjoying the chaos he created, settled back into his seat. He offered a plausible excuse for Erica's presence, mentioning the upcoming combat tournament Harold was entering. Participants could get injured, he reasoned, so bringing along his sister, who possessed healing magic, was simply a sensible precaution. Harold scoffed, insisting he had no intention of getting hurt, but Itsuki merely countered with a cheerful, "better safe than sorry," leaving Harold internally conceding the annoying yet valid point. As the awkward meal concluded and they parted ways from Itsuki, Erica later retreated with Yuno to the privacy of their assigned quarters. It was Yuno who broke the reflective silence, inquiring if Erica had indeed ended up dining with both Harold and Itsuki. Erica confirmed that she had. Then Yuno asked Erica if she had mentioned anything about Colette during the dinner. Erica firmly replied, no, explaining that she intended to keep it a secret. She further elaborated, stating that it was a sensitive secret they weren't truly meant to know yet, emphasizing the importance of protecting Colette, her mother Clara, and Harold's complex situation. Afterwards, Erica found herself gazing thoughtfully out the window, her mind turning over the events. She resolved to wait patiently until Harold himself chose to reveal everything to her personally. She had no intention of pressuring him about his secrets. However, she couldn't help but consider Colette, the girl who uniquely knew a truer side of Harold. Perhaps Colette could become one of his valuable allies. Erica found herself believing, or perhaps hoping, that the moment Harold finally decided to confide the whole truth to her, it might coincide with his reunion with Colette. If that time came, she mused, Colette might understandably become infatuated with the boy who had secretly saved her. And if Harold were to accept those feelings, Erica considered with a complex pang, she supposed she might become a rival for his affections. But ultimately, she concluded internally, she wouldn't truly mind if it genuinely made Harold happy. The following day, near the grand stadium where the tournament was to be held, Harold found himself observing the bustling crowds. His attention was suddenly caught by a commotion. A group of men, clearly intoxicated, were engaged in a loud, clumsy brawl. One man, staggering back from a poorly thrown punch, nearly collided with a young woman carrying a bundle, sending her stumbling. Before the drunkard could crash into her, Harold moved with startling speed. A swift, precise kick altered the man's trajectory, sending him sprawling away from the bystander. Harold didn't stop there. Grabbing the drunken brawler, he efficiently neutralized the immediate threat, leaving the man groaning on the ground. The man's companions shouted angrily, turning their attention towards Harold. Just then, uniformed knights pushed through the crowd, identifiable by their insignia as the Cody unit of the Holy Royal Chivalric Order, likely assigned to patrol the tournament grounds. The lieutenant leading them, a man with sharp, observant eyes beneath a casual demeanor, moved to intervene in the escalating situation. Before the knights could fully engage, one of the remaining drunkards charged recklessly at Harold. The lieutenant started forward, intending to protect the seemingly young civilian, but halted abruptly, his eyes widening slightly as he witnessed Harold's effortless response. With disdainful ease, Harold dodged the clumsy attack and delivered a single, calculated blow that sent the attacker collapsing to the ground, instantly subdued. Silence fell for a beat as the crowd, the remaining brawlers, and the knights took in the scene. The lieutenant approached Harold, his initial concern replaced by professional curiosity and perhaps a touch of awe. "Damn, nice skills," he muttered, clearly impressed, before asking Harold to explain what had transpired. Harold, reverting instantly to his abrasive persona, offered a curt, dismissive explanation of the drunken fight and his intervention. He then turned to leave. The lieutenant tried to stop him, asking if he was injured and perhaps requesting his name for a report. Harold just snapped that he was fine and that the lieutenant was annoying. If he wanted details, Harold gestured towards the now sobering brawlers and onlookers, suggesting he should ask a bystander rather than waste his valuable time. With that, Harold strode away, melting back into the crowd. The lieutenant watched him go, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. "Guess you figured me out," he murmured to himself, a hint of frustration in his voice as he realized he'd forgotten the most crucial step, getting the skilled, arrogant boy's name. As Harold walked away, however, Hirasawa's mind was racing. That lieutenant, he recognized him. The uniform, the demeanor, it matched descriptions from the Brave Hearts game. That had to be Cody Musiel, the eventual leader of the Friar mercenary group. Hirasawa recalled Cody's complex role in the game, often an ally to Liner's party, occasionally joining them, but fundamentally a supporting character driven by his own code. Not inherently evil, but pragmatic and unpredictable. A strategic opportunity presented itself. If Hirasawa could somehow get acquainted with Cody now, perhaps build some rapport, it could prove immensely valuable later, offering a potential inside track or ally when dealing with the protagonist party or navigating the complex political landscape. The encounter, though brief and hostile on Harold's end, had planted a seed for future planning. The day of the tournament finally arrived. Harold met Itsuki near the entrance, only for his good mood, or lack thereof, to evaporate instantly. Itsuki, grinning mischievously, revealed Harold's tournament entry. He had been secretly signed up under the utterly ridiculous alias Mr. Lord, complete with an equally absurd, ornate mask Itsuki presented with flourish. Harold felt a vain pulse in his temple. The humiliation was palpable. Furious but trapped by circumstance and Itsuki's infuriating cheerfulness, Harold snatched the mask, suppressing a growl. He resigned himself to the absurdity, his focus narrowing purely on the fights ahead. Winning quickly and getting this farce over with was now paramount. He stepped into the bustling ring, the announcer booming the arrival of the mysterious Mr. Lord. The crowd roared with anticipation, intrigued by the spectacle. Harold endured the noise for a moment. Then his gaze instinctively swept the packed stands, and then his blood ran cold. Amidst the sea of faces, he saw her, Colette. Her eyes were wide, fixed directly on him. She had seen him. She recognized him. His heart sank, the carefully constructed compartments of his plan. Saving her, keeping his identity separate, managing the timeline, suddenly felt dangerously exposed. In that instant of mutual recognition across the noisy arena, Harold knew with chilling certainty. Things were about to get incredibly complicated. Shaking off the distraction, Harold faced his intimidated opponent, Malik Mia. As soon as the match began, Harold moved with blinding speed. Malik, overwhelmed, immediately conceded. Harold felt no satisfaction, his mind racing. If Colette was here, then Liner was here. He scanned the participant list for the next round, his fears confirmed. Liner Griffith was scheduled to fight. This encounter was happening years earlier than in the game. Liner won his first match swiftly, showcasing raw talent. Harold intercepted him in the waiting area, initiating contact. He offered a backhanded compliment on Liner's fighting style, managing to slip in a few characteristic insults. Liner, earnest and oblivious to the underlying tension, was thrilled by the attention from the renowned Mr. Lord, eagerly begging Harold to teach him his speed technique. Harold challenged him to earn it by winning his way up the tournament bracket to face him in a later round. Liner enthusiastically agreed. Hirasawa felt a surge of strategic excitement. This early encounter, while unexpected, offered a unique opportunity. If he could subtly guide and strengthen Liner now, perhaps even build a grudging respect, it could significantly improve their chances against Justice later. The key was Liner hating Harold in the original plot because he killed Clara. That motivator was now gone. Befriending Liner, or at least becoming a rival who pushed him, seemed possible. The main hurdle remained Harold's ingrained personality. Being genuinely nice was practically impossible. Eventually, the anticipated match arrived. Mr. Lord versus Liner Griffith. Liner attacked first, full of raw energy but lacking refined technique. Harold, observing critically, felt a pang of disappointment. This was the hero destined to save the world. His current skill level seemed woefully inadequate. Harold easily dodged Liner's clumsy attacks. When Liner questioned why he was only defending, Harold called him pathetic and launched a single decisive counterattack. The force of the blow shattered Liner's sword, sending him reeling to his knees, shocked by the overwhelming power difference. He lamented his weakness despite his efforts. Just as the referee moved to declare Harold the winner, Harold yelled for him to wait. Ignoring protocol, he stalked over to the waiting area, intimidated an eliminated participant into handing over their sword, and tossed it to the bewildered Liner, asking if he still had the will to fight. He needed to push Liner, to awaken his potential. He questioned Liner's motivation. Why did he seek strength? Liner, after a moment's reflection, spoke of his admiration for the chivalric order, his dream of becoming a knight to protect people. He recounted the incident where he tried to defend Colette from bullies who wanted her pendant, the one Harold had given her, getting beaten up but solidifying his resolve. Colette, touched by his bravery, had given him the necklace that day as a symbol of his promise. Recalling this memory ignited something within Liner. His posture straightened, his eyes gained a new fire. Harold recognized the signs instantly. The awakening of the brave mode, a powerful state from the game triggered by strong resolve. He provoked Liner further, stating that resolve without skill was meaningless. The taunt worked. Energy surged around Liner as he entered the first stage of brave mode. He attacked with renewed ferocity, forcing Harold onto the defensive. The battle raged, now on more equal footing, the crowd stunned into silence. Both fighters pushed their limits. Just as Liner's brave mode seemed to fade, the sight of Colette's pendant, which had fallen during the fight, reignited his determination, pushing him unexpectedly into a higher stage of power, surprising even Hirasawa. Faced with this overwhelming surge, Harold was forced to unleash one of his own powerful spells, finally overwhelming Liner and knocking him unconscious. Harold stood victorious, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. Liner wasn't a disappointment after all. The potential was there, raw but undeniable. As Colette rushed to Liner's side, Harold, reverting to form, couldn't resist taunting her for relying on someone so weak and pathetic. Colette ignored him, tending to Liner. Later in the medical room, Liner slowly woke up to find Colette sitting beside him. She gently asked how he was feeling. Liner admitted he was doing fine and added that Harold had gone easy on him. Seeing her reaction, he asked if something had happened. Colette instead asked him a question of her own, whether he would protect her no matter what, even though he had lost to Harold Sama. This caught Liner off guard, especially when she addressed him with Sama. Curious, he asked why she spoke to him that way. Colette explained that in the past, he had helped both her and her mother, and even the necklace she wore had been given to her by him. Liner didn't react much, but he was surprised to learn that she saw him as a noble figure. He admitted Harold was incredible, half teasing about what Harold had told him at the end of the fight. Colette then asked if he wasn't angry about losing. Liner confessed that while he was frustrated, he felt no resentment, only determination. Next time, he vowed he would definitely surpass Harold. Hearing this, Colette smiled warmly. She told him she would fetch the doctor to check on him, and as she left, her expression softened. She was happy to see that Linnair's motivation remained unbroken. Later, Cody, who had been observing the tournament, invited Harold and Itsuki for drinks. He praised Harold's performance and formally invited him to join the chivalric order, specifically his unit. Hirasawa saw this as another crucial step. Joining the order was part of the original Harold's trajectory and offered access to resources, training, and potentially vital information. Cody, ever cunning, remarked on Harold's apparent bias towards Liner, suspecting the fight was more about provoking Liner's potential than simply winning. Harold deflected with mockery, but internally solidifying his plan. He accepted Cody's offer. On their way back from Delpit, Itsuki questioned Harold's decision, knowing the notoriously difficult Stokes parents would likely object. Harold confidently explained his rationale. Joining the elite chivalric order, directly commanded by the king, offered prestige his father couldn't resist, overriding any personal objections. It also provided access to dangerous missions, offering invaluable combat experience necessary for survival. Itsuki, perceptive as ever, asked if Harold was doing this solely for his family's sake. Harold, after a brief pause, defaulted to his established persona, scoffing that he only lived for himself. Upon returning to the Stokes estate, Harold informed his parents about being scouted by the prestigious chivalric order after heroically and somewhat fabricatedly subduing a drunken brawl in Delpit, conveniently omitting the tournament details. He emphasized becoming the youngest enlistee ever. As predicted, Hayden and Jessica swelled with pride, seeing it as a massive boost to the family's status. Hayden immediately ordered a celebratory feast. His plan had worked. Parental opposition was neutralized. Harold then informed his core team, Norman, Zen, and Jake, of his impending departure for the royal capital in 1 week. He assured them the LP farming project was in capable hands with the Sumiura partnership, but requested regular updates. Zen predictably became emotional, tearfully expressing his fear for Harold's safety in the dangerous chivalric order. Harold responded with his usual harshness, kicking Zen and threatening to send him to the underworld first if he kept imagining Harold dying. After dismissing them, Harold collapsed onto his couch, exhausted but resolute. Joining the order was a necessary step, mirroring the original plot while accelerating his own development. He mused on the original Harold's likely motivations, perhaps a simple lust for power and recognition, a desperate attempt to overcome his defeats by Liner, ultimately leading him down the path to Justice's manipulation. A servant interrupted his thoughts, announcing the feast preparations were complete. Taking a final glance around the room that had been his gilded cage for years, Hirasawa felt a strange pang of something akin to nostalgia before heading out. Soon he was in a carriage, waving a detached farewell to his beaming parents, leaving the Stokes territory behind and heading towards the heart of the kingdom, the royal capital of Amisole, and the next, more dangerous phase of his survival game. Arriving at Amaziel, Hirasawa was momentarily awestruck by the capital's scale and technological polish. Towering spires, crowded avenues, even ships drifting through the air, a sight far beyond anything in the Stokes territory or the game's usual depictions. He swallowed the feeling of smallness, checked his notes, and confirmed the meeting point. Cody soon appeared in his chivalric order uniform, greeting Harold with unfazed cheer. Harold, defaulting to snark, said he was already sick of Cody's face and demanded confirmation that his enlistment was moving forward. Recognizing Harold's prickly nature, Cody flashed a reassuring thumbs up, then compared Harold's talent to that of another prodigy who had joined young, Vincent von Westerfort, the current vice captain. Elsewhere, Vincent worked in his office, handsome features set in a serious line. Suddenly, Vincent sensed that something was happening outside and went to check. He asked if Cody's unit had any joint training scheduled, but his assistant Shannon confirmed there was none on the schedule. Vincent sighed, bracing for whatever chaos Cody might cook up next. Right on cue, Cody burst in to announce an impromptu enlistment exam for a newcomer. Vincent, resigned, warned him not to cause trouble. Cody only grinned and teased that something fascinating was about to happen at the training grounds. Vincent lamented Cody's untamable energy, but acknowledged his competence. When Shannon asked why he always tolerated Cody's stunts, a flicker of complicated emotion crossed Vincent's face. memories of a shared, traumatic past that explained their deep, if strained, bond. He admitted he felt responsible for keeping Cody grounded within the Order's restraints, uncertain whether that influence was kindness or a cage. Back at the rendezvous, Harold waited, impatient, mulling over Vincent's presence and future role. Hirasawa's internal alarms rang. Vincent, stoic, supremely capable, and, in the game, fated to become a late-game boss after Justice exploited his losses, eventually fell to Cody. The board was already setting itself. Cody returned and led Harold to the training grounds, where his unit gathered with curious looks for the Delphic prodigy. Then, with characteristic bluntness, Cody announced the enrollment exam. Harold would fight the entire unit. To stoke competition, he promised promotions to anyone who could defeat the boy. Harold saw no obstacle, only opportunity. A predatory smile touched his lips as he accepted, inviting anyone eager to lose to step up first. The exam began. One by one, soldiers attacked. The first fell in under a minute. In the second bout, Harold moved with fluid, precise dominance, noting patterns born of frustration rather than strategy. He mocked his opponent, who snapped and cast Aqua Slash. Recognizing the spell's signature from the game, Hirasawa counterspelled it cleanly, stunning the onlookers. Magic negation was rare, demanding exact timing and a deep grasp of the incoming weave. He did it again against a different spell, proving it wasn't luck, then finished the duel in a single slash. Bored with singles, Harold raised the stakes and told them to attack all at once. Drawn by Cody's promise of spectacle, Vincent watched from a nearby window as Harold met the onslaught. A blur of dodges, parries, and ruthless counters. The boy's defense was flawless, his anticipation uncanny. It wasn't just skill, it felt as if he knew the Order's techniques intimately. Suspicion hardened. How could an outsider possess such knowledge unless he had prior, possibly hostile, experience with them? Vincent instructed Shannon to compile records of the Order's battles from the last decade, searching for any thread that could explain Harold's impossible foresight. On the sand below, the exam became a demonstration, and even Vincent, stone-faced and seasoned, found himself momentarily speechless. A few days after his tumultuous enlistment, Cody led Harold Stokes to the barracks of the Royal Chivalric Order unit he was assigned to. The introduction was brief and charged with immediate tension. 3 senior members stepped forward: a cheerful man named Sid, a powerfully built but quiet man named Robinson, and a young woman with a sharp, critical gaze named Irene. Upon hearing their names, Harold froze for a fraction of a second, a flicker of recognition crossing his face before being suppressed. Irene, misinterpreting his hesitation as disrespect, immediately berated him for failing to offer a proper self-introduction to his superiors. Harold's response was characteristically caustic. He retorted that a few years of age did not automatically earn his deference, a statement that nearly earned him a slap before Cody intervened, physically pulling the enraged Irene away. Once the others had departed, leaving Harold to the stark quiet of his new quarters, the abrasive facade crumbled. He was consumed by a chilling certainty. Robinson, Sid, and Irene, he knew them. In the world he came from, they were characters in a game, and their names were etched into a specific tragic event. They were all slated to die. Their deaths were the very catalyst that would drive Cody to abandon the chivalric order and forge his own path, creating a group known as Free. Harold found himself ensnared in yet another web of fate, each thread pulling him toward a disastrous outcome. He was faced with an agonizing dilemma. The battle in the Balus forest, the event that would claim their lives, was supposed to be a year away. According to the Order's regulations, he wouldn't even be an official member of their unit until that year had passed. He considered the consequences of intervention. If he saved them, if he prevented the tragedy that defined Cody's future, he might erase the very motivation that led Cody to become an indispensable ally later in the game's main storyline. A crucial quest, one vital for the world's salvation, could not be completed without Cody's help. Harold was paralyzed by the choice: feign ignorance and allow his new squad mates to walk toward their doom, or save them and potentially shatter the timeline, jeopardizing the entire world he was trying to protect. While Harold wrestled with his grim knowledge, a different kind of assessment was taking place in a quiet office. Shannon, an aide, presented a detailed background report on Harold Stokes to Vincent. Vincent summoned Cody, handing him the file. He explained his desire to fast-track Harold's official assignment to the unit, placing him under Cody's continuous observation. Vincent's urgency was rooted in a deep-seated paranoia, born from a past betrayal by a spy named Noah Hawk, who had leaked critical intelligence. He saw a disturbing parallel in Harold. The boy's uncanny ability to anticipate the knight's movements during his entrance exam was too precise, too predictive. It suggested a foreknowledge that was either brilliant or treacherous. Vincent suspected Harold might be an associate of the former traitor. To confirm or debunk this hypothesis, he needed Cody to be his eyes and ears. In the meantime, Harold's life within the Order settled into a grueling routine of relentless training. He deliberately avoided the bullies who resented his prowess, knowing that a confrontation could easily escalate beyond his control. His own unit, however, refused to be ignored. They forcefully integrated him into their small circle. Sid proved to be irrepressibly cheerful and comically desperate for romance. Robinson was a mountain of muscle with a surprisingly gentle core. Irene, however, maintained a constant air of disdain. During one of their strained interactions, she declared that with his perpetually foul attitude, he would never find love. It was then that Cody chose to interrupt, casually dropping a piece of information that ignited the group like a spark in a powder keg. He mentioned, with a sly grin, that Harold already had a fiancée. The revelation caused an immediate uproar, plunging Harold into a new kind of social torment. He demanded to know how Cody had obtained such private information, but his superior merely deflected with infuriating amusement. 2 weeks into his probationary period, a counselor informed Harold that his final exam was scheduled for the end of the week. Passing it would secure his official place in the unit. Harold met the news with a smirk of pure arrogance, declaring he knew he would receive special treatment. In his short time there, he had managed to antagonize nearly everyone, with the notable exceptions of his company commander and platoon leader. The day of the exam arrived, revealing the test to be a live monster subjugation mission. Cody's unit, accompanied by a few commanders, was tasked with clearing a designated area. Harold's performance would be observed and graded throughout. The mission began uneventfully until they encountered an unexpectedly powerful monster. As the company commander began to delegate roles, Harold cut him off, insisting he would handle it alone. Before anyone could object, he launched himself into the air, his blade wreathed in fire, and incinerated the creature in a single devastating strike. His comrades could only stare, their jaws agape, but Harold was growing accustomed to their shock. Later that night, the observing commander noted in his report that the boy possessed remarkable capabilities, and, despite his abrasive personality, seemed to be developing a rapport with his unit. The next day, as they made their way back, their path was suddenly obscured by a strange dark fog rising from the ground ahead. It was a phenomenon none of them had ever witnessed, but it was the look of profound disturbance on Harold's face that signaled the truth. The real exam was only just beginning. The group stared at the mysterious, blood-colored vapor with a mixture of awe and apprehension. One of the soldiers suggested it might just be smoke, but the company commander pointed out its unnatural color and erratic, upward billowing movement. It seemed to originate from a specific point on the ground. Cody glanced at Harold and was taken aback. For the first time since they had met, the boy's expression was not one of arrogance or irritation, but of genuine confusion. The company commander, noticing it as well, asked Harold if he recognized the entity. To everyone's surprise, Harold admitted he had no idea what it was. True to his character's nature, Harold snapped at his team, calling them numbskulls for failing to sense the creature's palpable, intimidating aura. Cody then asked the company commander what they should do. The commander replied that he would take a look himself, stepping forward as he spoke. Harold's warning cry came an instant too late. The crimson smoke coalesced. Forming a sharp blade-like tendril, it lashed out toward the company commander's exposed back. In a blur of motion that defied belief, Harold shot forward, his speed like a lightning flash, and shoved the commander out of the blade's path. The attack missed by inches. It was in that moment that Cody realized they had gravely underestimated their opponent. More columns of the smoke began to erupt from the earth, sealing off their escape routes. The company commander stammered his thanks. Harold, his eyes fixed on the shifting enemy, told him he could thank him later if they survived. They were completely surrounded, adopted a fighting stance and lunged, his sword cutting through one of the smoky figures. It dissipated for a moment, only to regenerate instantly and lash out with a blade of its own, forcing him back. A crucial detail became terrifyingly clear: that physical attacks were useless. When the creature attacked, its form was solid and deadly. Their defenses were meaningless, and their offenses were ineffective. Panic began to set in, and Irene's voice trembled as she said what they were all thinking. Their attacks were useless, and they were doomed. Robinson asked the commander if they should try to run, but there was nowhere to go. Even the company commander composure was cracking. He muttered that this wasn't a fight, it was a slow execution. Their collective despair was shattered by a brilliant flash of light. Harold, his hand crackling with electrical energy, broke the silence with a furious tirade. He called them spineless cowards, snarling that if they had time to worry, they had time to draw their swords. He unleashed a bolt of lightning that struck one of the smoke creatures, causing it to disintegrate. But just as before, it reformed moments later. The brief surge of hope died as quickly as it had appeared. Magic, it seemed, was as ineffective as steel. But Harold's resolve was unshaken, and he was not alone. Cody, with a grim laugh, declared he couldn't let the kid hog all the spotlight. He unleashed a powerful torrent of flame at the nearest creature. Even Harold was momentarily shocked by the intensity of the blast, but the enemy emerged completely unscathed. Undeterred, Cody laughed again and launched another spell, this time an arc of pure water. To everyone's astonishment, where the water magic and aqua slash made contact, a small portion of the smoke sizzled and vanished permanently. It was the breakthrough they desperately needed. The commander, seizing on the discovery, immediately cast his own aqua slash and ordered everyone to do the same. But their hope was once again short-lived. The commander's spell had no effect. The monster seemed immune. The commander's anxiety returned, his mind grappling with the horrifying possibility that the enemy was adapting to their attacks. Through the chaos, Harold remained preternaturally calm. He analyzed the sequence of events with cold, detached logic. Cody's water spell worked, but the commander's didn't. It wasn't adaptation. He voiced his deduction aloud. There was a chance that each individual smoke entity was vulnerable to a single specific element. They just had to find the right one for each. The commander and Cody stared at the 13-year-old boy, stunned by the speed and clarity of his instincts in the heat of battle. Cody offered a compliment on his combat experience, which Harold dismissed with a sharp command to focus on the fight. He then took charge, barking orders for everyone to bombard each separate creature with a variety of magic until they found its weakness, while the others formed a defensive line. The air filled with a chaotic symphony of spells: wind arrow, flame cram, bolt lance, as they threw everything they had at the enemy. The combined assault from Harold, Cody, and the commander began to yield results. One by one, the crimson clouds dissolved under the correct elemental attacks. When the last one vanished and the dust settled, the forest was silent. There was no sign of the enemy. Harold had saved them all. The commander let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding and quickly confirmed that no one was injured. His attention then turned to Harold. He knew with a certainty that humbled him that they were alive because of the boy's instantaneous planning and tactical brilliance. He was keenly aware that if Harold hadn't risked his own life to save him at the very beginning, he would be dead. A wave of shame washed over him. As a company commander, his carelessness had nearly cost them everything. He had ignored Harold's initial warning about the creature's aura and provoked it. Swallowing his pride, the commander, the seasoned officer, walked over to the young recruit and bowed his head deeply. He apologized, admitting that his misjudgment had created the crisis. Harold scowled, correcting him sharply. It wasn't a misjudgment. It was a mistake. He warned the commander not to make it again. The commander accepted the rebuke without protest, promising to take the advice to heart. Harold said nothing more, turning away. He knew that it was precisely these kinds of stupid mistakes that were destined to get Cody's unit killed in the future. The weight of that knowledge, now that he was getting to know them as people, pressed down on him more heavily than ever. With the immediate danger gone, Cody and the commander conferred. They agreed that the creature was a new, uncatalogued type of monster, and that a full investigation was needed. Harold listened, privately reflecting on the battle. He was relieved that his feigned ignorance about the monster hadn't hindered their performance. The truth was, he knew exactly what they had faced. They were called eerie clouds, a manifestation of the main villain, Justice's plans. monsters spawned from the corrosion of the earth itself. The fact that they had appeared so early in the timeline put him on edge. In the original game, the eerie clouds were a mid-story threat. The main plot hadn't even truly begun yet. He wondered if their early appearance was a pre-scripted event he had simply forgotten, or if it was another, more dangerous sign that Eustace's plans were accelerating. A single drop of sweat traced a path down his temple. If the story was speeding up, it meant the developments he had no knowledge of could occur at any time. His unexpected encounter with Liner at the tournament was one such proof. He considered his own actions. The development and distribution of the antibiotics, a task originally performed by one of the protagonist's comrades, was the first major change he had introduced. His early enlistment in the chivalric order was another. In the game, the circumstances and age of Harold's enlistment were never specified. It was entirely possible that his very presence here was the catalyst speeding up the world's march toward disaster. He shook his head, trying to banish the worst-case scenarios from his mind. He needed to ascertain the plans of his arch-nemesis, the final boss of brave hearts, Eustace Freund. Publicly, Eustace was a renowned scientist, a prodigy celebrated across the kingdom. In reality, he was a madman willing to sacrifice the world to achieve his twisted ambitions. His thoughts were interrupted by Cody, who asked what was churning in his tiny little brain. Cody, for all his goofiness, was exceptionally perceptive. He questioned Harold directly, asking if he had encountered monsters like the eerie clouds before. He pointed out that Harold had immediately resorted to magic, suggesting he already knew physical attacks would be useless. It was a logical deduction. Perhaps he had fought similar creatures during his monster subjugation campaigns back on his family's territory. Harold maintained his cover, scowling as he claimed that a sword wasn't the only way to attack. He insisted that his intuition had told him to use magic, and that was all. Cody seemed to accept the explanation, remarking that it wasn't surprising for someone of Harold's caliber to have such sharp instincts. With a scoff, Harold arrogantly boasted that his brain was simply built differently from those of the numbskulls around him. In response, Cody playfully ruffled his hair as if he were a child, triggering their typical dynamic of banter and barely concealed fury. While Sikri reprimanded Cody, Harold seethed, silently plotting his platoon leader's murder. He was also unsettled by the fact that Cody's suspicion, though temporarily assuaged, had not been entirely erased. Throughout the rest of their journey back, Harold felt Cody's eyes on him, probing and analytical. Upon their return, Harold immediately resumed his solitary, punishing training regimen. He felt time slipping away. Eustace's research institute was located in the royal capital, and in the original story, the villain eventually arrived at the royal castle to report his findings. Harold tried to strategize a way to make contact, to probe the mad scientist for his plans, but every scenario he imagined ended in his own death. A direct confrontation was suicide. If Eustace suspected him in the slightest, he would be eliminated without a second thought. Capturing him was equally impossible. The only person who could stop the Earth's corrosion was Eustace himself, and there was no way he would cooperate. His session was interrupted by the arrival of his unit, Irene, Sid, and Robinson, each carrying a wooden sword. They stood before him, their expressions a mixture of embarrassment and resolve. Then, in unison, the trio bowed their heads and formally requested that Harold teach them swordsmanship. Harold's initial reaction was to refuse, but then he looked at them, at their earnest, determined faces, and remembered their fate. In 1 year, they were supposed to die. While he was still torn about altering the grand arc of the story, he realized there was nothing wrong with helping them become stronger. With a characteristic scoff, he agreed, but on one condition. His lessons would be brutal, and he would not go easy on them. He had his own training to consider, and he wouldn't let them slow him down. Within the Chivalric Order's headquarters, a high-level conference was underway. The subject of their discussion was Harold Stokes. Vincent argued passionately for the boy's immediate promotion and official assignment to a unit. He cited Harold's exemplary performance during the recent mission, where his tactical acumen had surpassed even that of the company commander. Early promotion, Vincent reasoned, would accelerate his combat experience and allow his talent to flourish. The president of the organization, a wizened old man named Maelstrom, agreed that the proposal was logical, but cautioned against hastiness. He pointed out Harold's youth and his abrasive nature, which he feared would inevitably cause discord. He suggested it would be better to spend more time instructing him in proper conduct first. Vincent countered with information Maelstrom was unaware of. He revealed that Harold's dominant performance in the entrance exam had bred resentment among his peers. The boy was being alienated, and Vincent had received reports of him being the target of constant assaults. In such a hostile environment, building positive relationships was impossible. Therefore, he argued, it was imperative to place him in a unit that held no ill will toward him. Cody's unit. He praised Cody's charisma and his unique ability to connect with subordinates, reminding the council that it was Cody who had recruited Harold in the first place. When Maelstrom still seemed unconvinced, Vincent played his final card, declaring that his sole goal was to ensure a talent as immense as Harold's was not wasted. Coming from Vincent, one of the most gifted individuals in the Order, such high praise for a mere boy swayed the council. Maelstrom conceded, officially approving Harold's enlistment. The council's deliberations were cut short by the sudden arrival of Commander Harrison from the armed forces. He offered a polite apology for the intrusion, claiming he was merely curious about the boy who had become the subject of so much discussion. When Vincent pressed him for his true objective, Harrison revealed an upcoming patrol mission that would require sending a unit to the national borders. The council pointed out that the borders were already patrolled, but Harrison explained that those very forces had requested reinforcements. The area demanding urgent investigation was Bayless Forest. Vincent recognized the name at once. It was the reclusive home of the Stant Stellar tribe. Centuries of internal conflict had left their numbers few, forcing them into isolation to ensure their survival. Vincent warned that gaining entry would not be simple. Harrison, however, was resolute. He was determined to lead a patrol into the forest, and his primary reason for appearing before the council was to request that the newcomer be assigned to the mission. Vincent's patience wore thin, arguing that sending an inexperienced recruit on such a task was far too risky. Harrison countered that the patrol was not dangerous and would serve as valuable experience. After a brief but tense exchange, Vincent reluctantly conceded. 1 month later, Harold received a letter from Tasuku detailing the immense success of their LP farming project. Along with it came his final exam results. Expecting rejection from every unit, he was stunned to see he had been assigned to Cody's squad, the very unit destined for the mission in Bellis Forest. A cold dread settled over him as another massive death flag appeared. The timeline felt wrong. Events were accelerating far too quickly. He knew this patrol was the precursor to a tragedy from the game, an event that took place 4 years before the main story, where Cody's entire unit was annihilated. Bayless Forest was the stage for a devastating war between the Sival Order and the Stant Stellar tribe. The conflict was a lie, orchestrated by Salian Empire troops disguised as members of both factions to incite a war. The man guiding them, the collaborator, was Commander Harrison, who was merely a puppet for the true mastermind, Justice. Hirasawa understood Justice's goal, to seize the experimental power wielded by the Stellar tribe. Both humans and monsters possess an internal energy known as astral bodies, which can be channeled to cast spells. The amount varies based on genetics and training, but the Stant Stellar tribe had a unique and powerful way of handling this energy. Overwhelmed by the foreknowledge of his comrades' deaths, Harold fled to Sumera village, hoping Tasuku could offer some guidance. But Tasuku was occupied. Instead, Harold encountered Erica. He tried to brush her off, but she remained by his side. Sensing his deep anxiety, she chose not to pry, instead, gently suggesting that he learn to rely on others. The simple words caught him completely off guard, striking a nerve. Annoyed, he spoke her name, but she continued, insisting that many people were ready to help him, even if he didn't count her among them. Her words echoed in his mind long after. She was right. He couldn't solve this alone. He slammed his fist on a desk, admitting to himself that he had never been truly alone. His progress was thanks to the efforts of people like Tasuku and Norman. He finally accepted that avoiding these death flags by himself was impossible. He needed others to actively intervene. His new mission was twofold: ensure his unit survives the coming battle, and simultaneously strengthen Liner and his friends for the future. Failure in either would mean his own end. In that moment, he felt he had truly become Harold. He smiled faintly, wondering how Erika could offer such kindness to someone who treated her so poorly. She was a genuinely good person, and it was a shame she had to hate him. When Tasuku finally appeared, Harold confessed everything: the impending war, Harrison's betrayal, and the massacre to come. As proof, he offered a single name he had learned from a mysterious entity: Gilfelt. The name alone, belonging to a being who could gather all the world's knowledge, sent a chill through Tasuku, erasing any doubt. He agreed to help, and the preparations for battle began. Later that night, Tasuku gazed up at the moon, reflecting on the storm that lay ahead. A mix of fear and determination filled him, as he thought about the perilous path Harold was now walking. Meanwhile, Cody's unit marched toward their fate, suspended between hope and despair, completely unaware they were walking toward death's door. The ignorance of his comrades was driving Hirasawa mad with stress. As they traveled through the barren lands, Harold's tension was palpable. He remained on high alert, constantly scanning his surroundings. His squad mates noticed his grim expression, teasing him for being nervous on his first mission. Robin clapped him on the shoulder, trying to reassure him that the monsters in this region were never that strong. The comment only fueled Harold's frustration. His eyes flashed with anger as he berated them for their excessive optimism, calling them blockheads and blaming their attitude for their recent failures. Sid and Robin were left speechless by the verbal assault. Irene merely commented that Harold seemed to be in a worse mood than usual, and Cody advised them to leave him be. But Sid, never the most perceptive, blundered forward. He asked if Harold was salty because he'd had a fight with his fiancée, Erika. The mention of her name made Harold both angry and flustered. Seizing the opportunity, Sid teased him relentlessly, revealing he knew Harold had visited her during their break. He declared they must be madly in love if Harold couldn't stop thinking about her, even after an argument. As Harold imagined a million ways to make Sid suffer, a unit behind them yelled at them to stop messing around. Taking a deep breath, Harold regretted that he hadn't prepared more countermeasures. His greatest obstacle was that his own unit refused to take the threat seriously. He recalled his conversation with Tasuku the day before. After explaining the situation, he had asked for a Salian Empire military uniform to be delivered to him in a town along their route. His plan was to wear it beneath his armor. If the battle erupted as predicted, he would reveal the uniform. The sudden appearance of a Salian soldier on a battlefield between the Civil Order and the Stellar Tribe would sow chaos and confusion, making both sides question who the true enemy was. But as he laid out his plan, Tasuku had warned him of the immense danger. Tasuku had warned him the plan was incredibly dangerous. At worst, Harold could find himself the target of both factions. No matter how strong he was still just one man. Harold, true to form, had scoffed at the warning, boasting that a mob of weaklings could never touch him. With a devilish grin, he had declared that no matter how many conspirators they gathered, he would eradicate every last mastermind behind the scheme. Tasuku had pleaded with him to reconsider, but Harold's stubbornness won out. He told Tasuku that how he chose to help didn't matter. He just needed the uniform. Tasuku had then said he didn't want to send his future son-in-law to an early grave. For a moment, Harold smiled and blushed, then remembered their plan to call off the engagement. But Tasuku informed him that an engagement could only be broken with the consent of both parties, making Harold wonder if Erika felt differently than he did. Back in the present, the thought of changing himself for the better crossed his mind for the first time, a moment of character development promptly shattered by Sid, who earned another death glare. Harold repeated his warning, telling his squad they were too relaxed and that Sid would be the first to die if a battle broke out. Sid, finally catching on, asked him to elaborate. Harold explained that their patrol was near the national border and that suspicious eyewitness reports from the forest might point to Salian Empire activity. Sid dismissed the concern, confident in their 200-strong army. Even if Harold's theory was true, they could quickly crush any opposition. Harold fought the urge to tell them the intel about 30 scouts was a lie, a trap set by justice. Instead, he simply warned them that if they wanted to live, they needed to be ready for a fight at any moment. Most of the squad rolled their eyes, but Cody looked thoughtful. Soon the barren land gave way to the beautiful town of Gracia, a place with ties to the Stant Stellar Tribe. Adjacent to it was the very place Hirasawa had been dreading, Belus Forest, destined to be soaked in the blood of his friends. As they unloaded their gear, Harold looked upon the majestic forest and saw only a luxurious graveyard. He worried whether Tasuku's help would arrive in time and how much he could truly accomplish. He had accepted his fate, but he refused to give up on his own life or the lives of his unit. Resolved to devise a better plan, he headed back to the station, only to realize he was completely lost. As he stood there, embarrassed, a group of suspiciously dressed men ambushed him. Before he could react, one of them removed their mask, revealing Yuno. Relief washed over Harold, quickly replaced by dread as he realized Tasuku had sent his best operatives into a death trap. He ordered Yuno and her squad to leave, but she refused, stating that they were under orders to entrust their lives to him. Yuno explained that everyone present was either an orphan or had been rescued from a life of hell by the Sumera family. They had all willingly dedicated their lives to repaying that debt. Yuno herself had nearly died once and felt it was only natural to execute this operation without revealing the Sumera family's involvement. Tasuku knew the risks, but had chosen to support Harold anyway. Bowing, Yuno asked him to honor their feelings. Speechless, Harold wondered what he had done to deserve such loyalty. He accepted their help, promising to make the best use of their petty lives. His own gruff way of saying thank you. Yuno led him to a private room she had reserved, revealing that even Erika had ordered her to obey him. The reinforcements were an unexpected but welcome advantage, especially since they were Tasuku's elite. He learned they had arrived in town before him, having been sent to monitor the Sival Order's expected route. Harold tasked them with shadowing the patrol unit and reporting any abnormalities. 3 days passed. A Sival unit patrolling the forest's central area spotted 2 individuals from the Stant Stellar tribe moving at incredible speed. A fight erupted, a gruesome clash whose outcome was unknown, but whose violence sent all nearby animals fleeing in terror. Meanwhile, Irene and Sid watched Harold, who was behaving strangely, obsessively polishing the same spot on his sword, lost in thought. His comrades assumed he was just fatigued from his first patrol, but when Harold saw a bird flying overhead, his expression hardened. Hirasawa knew from the game that this was the signal. The battle had begun. He met with Yuno and her squad, instructing them to hold on to the Empire uniforms until the fighting started, arranging a meeting point for the handoff. As a signal, Yuno suggested using a creature called a Fallomax, a tireless messenger. Hirasawa realized this was a new development, likely Erika's idea. The Bellis battle had officially started. Elsewhere, Cody was piecing things together. Harold's actions had been peculiar from the beginning. His suspicions began during the Red Mist incident. He now wondered if Harold had known the mist's true nature all along. If so, why the roundabout performance? He deduced Harold was hiding something. His anxiety during the expedition only deepened Cody's suspicion. He didn't believe Harold was evil, but Vincent's warning that the boy could bring down the Sival Order echoed in his mind. Slamming his cup down, Cody decided to confront Harold directly. His plan was interrupted by a soldier sprinting down the hall, shouting that a patrol unit had been attacked and needed immediate support. Cody commanded his unit to gear up, but was stunned to find Harold missing. He quickly concluded Harold had fled and left his squad under another commander's authority to give chase. Learning Harold had left on foot, Cody knew he could catch him. He found him soon enough. Harold, furious, ordered him back to the squad. Cody just smiled, reminding him that he was part of that squad too. He demanded to know why Harold was marching into a battlefield alone. When Harold didn't answer, Cody warned him of the punishment for desertion. Still, Harold insisted he get out of his way. After a tense stare-down, Cody drew his sword, declaring that if Harold wanted to pass, he would have to win a duel. Cody knew his actions were selfish, driven by a promise made long ago. He could not let Harold die. 20 years earlier, a 7-year-old Vincent had excitedly dragged a tired Cody to see the Sival Order return. Unlike his present robotic self, young Vincent's eyes had sparkled with admiration. Cody, however, had been unimpressed, complaining about homework and the Order's strict rules. Later, as Cody slept, he was woken by the smell of smoke. He and Vincent ran home to find their town in ruins, littered with bodies and burning houses. The enemy had attacked as soon as the knights departed. At their own home, they found Vincent's parents lying lifeless on the ground. Cody's father, though still alive, thrust a sword into his hands and ordered him to flee with Vincent before monsters arrived, drawn by the scent of death. A vicious beast lunged for Cody, but his father sacrificed himself as a decoy. Helplessly, Cody watched his father die before grabbing Vincent's hand and running until they had no tears left to cry. All that remained was trauma. Cody took his father's sword and, in his despair, nearly turned it on himself. Only a glance at Vincent stopped him. The boy was his responsibility now. He asked Vincent if he wanted a quick death or a chance to live. Vincent, eyes shut tight, admitted he was terrified of dying. On that day, Cody promised to live for Vincent, to protect him. Though a coward, Vincent became the reason Cody came to understand the pain of the weak. Their life became a daily struggle for survival. They scavenged through the burnt remains of their town and ate monster corpses to stay alive. In time, they were forced to kill humans in self-defense, with no one to rely on but each other. Through it all, Vincent lost his innocence, and Cody realized his own inner coward was long dead. By the age of 10, they were experienced enough to become mercenaries. 3 years of constant battle against strangers followed. One day, Cody was on the verge of death, wounded and cornered. Just as his enemy swung the finishing blow, Vincent intervened, saving his life. That was the day Cody made Vincent promise they would join the chivalric order, not to take lives, but to save them. Their new goal was to ensure no other child would suffer as they had. Back in the present, steel met steel, and the fight truly began. Harold had already deduced that he slipped away without permission and ignored the recall. If danger found him now, he had earned it. Even so, Harold had to break through and reach the rendezvous with Yuno and the others, fast. Cody opened with Aqua Slash, the arc carving the air as Harold vaulted aside and drove in. Between exchanges, Cody pressed him about the future. Hirasawa, buried within, wanted only to dodge death flags. Harold's outward answer was colder. He intended to live for himself. Cody tested further, gauging whether Harold kept friends or comrades. Harold dismissed the notion aloud, even as a quieter thought admitted that, if it were possible for him, he would already have found someone to trust. Cody's judgment remained steady. Humans were weak alone and became strong together, and Harold's headlong charge reminded him of the way Vincent once clung to an impossible dream. If Harold was truly fighting to protect something, they could stand on the same side. Lightning gathered along Harold's blade. Cody set to block, then blinked as Harold shifted his grip mid-dash and altered the angle. The strike skimmed past. Cody recovered with a half smile, recognizing how quickly Harold adapted. Harold, meanwhile, measured the gap. Cody was a support only in title. In truth, he was specialized and dangerous. His mastery with the longsword a bad match for Harold's current kit. In the game's world, Cody rotated a wider arsenal. Had he drawn a sidearm, his patterns would have been easier to read. As it stood, even a clean approach barely grazed him. Harold feinted into Kryden Blitz. Cody slipped aside into a waiting sigil. Flame Cram flared, and Cody blew it out with Wind Fang, threading magic into defense so smoothly it startled Harold. Closing again, Cody's momentum sharpened, the tempo of a man determined to end things before reinforcements arrived. If Harold kept trading like this, he would lose. At the rendezvous, Yuno received word from the Fallow Wax courier. The shadow team tailing the Chival Order was on its way back. They would wait for Harold. A pressure peaked on the field. As Cody's soaring whirlwind bore down, Harold chose disruption over elegance. He drove his sword into the earth, Grand Punisher, splitting the ground and throwing up a shroud of dust. Cody knifed through the fractures, avoided the blasts, and knocked Harold's weapon free, just as Yuno's unit burst from the haze and ringed the clearing. Surrounded by the very allies Harold had once claimed he didn't need, Cody let the irony hang. Harold had engineered it that way. Grand Punisher hadn't only broken the terrain, it had also served as a beacon, a deliberate signal for Yuno to mark his position and close. Restraints came out. Cody was taken. He warned that binding him would only buy time. Harold leaned in on that point. Even if Cody ran back now, his duty wasn't finished. With his path cleared, Harold told Cody to fulfill his duty as a lieutenant and save his unit instead of worrying about him. He and Yuno's team entered the forest, their plan set. Harold, wearing the Salian uniform, would act as a diversion, while the rest of the Sumeragi force would capture the real Salian soldiers attacking the Chivalric Order units. Heavy casualties had already been reported. Harold felt a pang of guilt. If he had listened to Erica, if he had asked for help sooner, perhaps some of this could have been prevented. But there was no time for regret. He was ready to turn the tide of this battle. Harold led the hooded Sumeragi warriors through the dense woods. He had told them their petty lives were now his property, and he would not permit any of them to die without his permission. They were unfazed by his condescending attitude. They had been told to expect it. Weeks earlier, Tasuku had gathered them, his most trusted operatives, in the Sumeragi village. He explained that the Salian Empire was orchestrating a war between the chivalric order and the stellar tribe. When questioned why the army wasn't being mobilized, Tasuku explained that the intelligence lacked concrete proof, forcing them to operate in the shadows. He revealed that their mission was to support a single individual who intended to obstruct the battle all by himself, Harold Stokes. The leader of the force had called the plan reckless, but Tasuku defended Harold, explaining that he had always fought alone. When asked why he was going to such lengths for the boy, Tasuku decided to share a closely guarded secret, first making them swear never to repeat it, not even to Harold. He told them the story of the servant Harold had supposedly killed was a lie. In truth, Harold had protected the servant from his own parents, who would have had her killed. He had secretly paid for her living expenses and moved her and her mother to an isolated village where they lived peacefully to this day. He kept the secret to protect them, shouldering the false accusation of murder to deceive his own family. Tasuku also revealed that Harold was the true source of both the miasma antibiotic and the LP farming method. He had used the Sumeragi name to avoid his parents discovering his creations and exploiting them for their own gain. The intelligence about the Bellis Forest conspiracy had been secured at great personal risk, and yet the only thing Harold had asked for in return was a single Salian military uniform. Tasuku concluded by telling them that Harold was accustomed to being alone and was inexperienced at relying on others, but that he possessed a kinder heart than anyone. That was why he had begged them, his most loyal force, to lend Harold their strength. Back in the present, Harold reviewed their strategy. There were approximately 150 invading Empire forces. 50 of them would be attacking the Stellar Tribe. From Eustace's perspective, this was enough. He only needed to seize a few test subjects and plant the evidence that the chivalric order was the aggressor. The remaining 100 Empire soldiers were disguised as Stellar Tribe warriors, luring the chivalric patrol forces, numbering around 120, into a trap. The formation of the patrol had clearly been leaked. They were nearing their destination. Harold commanded his forces to spread out. He donned his mask and the Salian uniform, then created a massive explosion to draw attention to himself. Chivalric soldiers, taking cover from the blast, spotted him standing on a ridge. They demanded to know his identity, recognizing he was not from the Stellar Tribe. Harold was frustrated. The real Salian soldiers were still hidden, and he couldn't flush them out without a proper lure. He unsheathed his sword and provoked the chivalric knights, declaring they would all become cornerstones for the Empire's glory. This had an unintended effect. The chivalric commander, seeing a Salian soldier on the battlefield, immediately assumed the Empire was inciting a war between the kingdoms. Harold cursed under his breath. He had made the situation even more complicated, but he knew he couldn't back down now. He reasoned that if his actions led to the exposure of Eustace's plot, the mad scientist himself would face consequences. He had no reason to hesitate. He raised his sword and declared that everyone here was going to die, signaling his hidden forces to commence their attack. A shower of arrows rained down from the sky, forcing the chivalric soldiers to scatter. As chaos erupted, Harold worked to deduce the positions of the hidden enemy archers, waiting for the Sumeragi subordinates to track them down and capture them. Among the Sumeragi force, Yuno fought with joyful ferocity, hoping things were going as smoothly on Harold's side. But as she dispatched another enemy soldier, the sound of echoing footsteps from all directions alerted her. They were surrounded. A much larger force was closing in. Meanwhile, Harold was occupied, carefully knocking out the chivalric soldiers without inflicting any fatal wounds. Far away, Erica prayed for his safety. The process was taking longer than he'd expected. When the last of the chivalric knights in his vicinity was incapacitated, Harold commanded his detachment to fall back. He noticed a familiar face among the captured enemy soldiers, posing as Stellar Tribe warriors, a second lieutenant from the chivalric order. his disguise consisting of nothing more than a pair of fake pointed ears. Harold grabbed the man by the collar, sneering at the pathetic disguise. He demanded to know everything about his comrades who were attacking the real stellar tribe. The lieutenant's eyes went wide with panic. He stammered that he was only following orders from the army and knew nothing else. Harold's gaze narrowed, and the man's composure shattered. He broke down, tears streaming down his face, begging for his life. Harold released him in disgust, declaring him not even worth the effort to kill. The questioning had been a front. He already knew everything from the game. All he needed was a witness to testify. His thoughts were interrupted when one of his men rushed in, shouting that they had an emergency. Enemy reinforcements, roughly 200 strong, had been sighted invading the Stellar Tribe's territory. Harold's first thought was of Yuno. His fears were realized. Yuno was battered and bleeding, surrounded by the lifeless bodies of her comrades. Though shivering from pain and fear, her face was a mask of pure anger. The leader of the enemy force, a large, brutal-looking man, called her stubborn trash that needed to be disposed of. Yuno's mind flashed back through her past. She was an orphan from the slums, recruited and trained as an assassin. She had killed and gathered intel without question, casting away all sentimental feelings. One of her missions had been to sell the location of a secret Stellar Tribe village, which was subsequently destroyed. Later, after failing a mission to assassinate a Sumeragi target, the family had taken her in. It was there, under Erika's care, that she was forced to confront the innocent lives she had helped extinguish. On every mission for her new family, Erika's final command was always the same: return alive. She believed Harold knew about her past and had brought her here deliberately, giving her a chance to atone for her sins against the Stellar Tribe. She would not allow the opportunity he had given her to be wasted. Drawing on her last reserves of strength, she slowly rose to her feet, leveling her dagger at the enemy commander. She knew she might not be able to keep her promise to Erika, but she would not go down without a fight. The enemy leader was enraged by her defiance. He offered her one last chance to run, but she simply smiled. "Resisting until the bitter end," she said, "is the mission I was entrusted with." The man roared and swung his massive sword. Just as the blade was about to connect with her neck, it was stopped with a deafening clang of steel on steel. Harold had arrived, blocking the attack with his own sword. Yuno's eyes lit up with hope. The commander of the reinforcements, a man named Liesult, was annoyed. He demanded to know why a Salian soldier was interfering. Harold responded with his usual sass, mocking Liesult for being too stupid to recognize he wasn't a comrade. Before Liesult could fully process the insult, Harold delivered a swift, brutal kick to his groin. As Liesult doubled over, recovering, Harold turned to Yuno. He tossed her a healing potion and commanded her to treat everyone, even if it used the whole bottle. When she insisted on treating his own injuries first, he shut her down, telling her to stop bothering him and get her comrades to safety, so he wouldn't have to look at their pathetic state. It was his harsh way of showing concern. Yuno reminded him that they were surrounded, but Harold glanced at the enemy soldiers and dismissed them as eyesores, not a credible threat. Liesult, having recovered his breath and his pride, challenged him to try. Harold accepted, lunging forward with blinding speed. He vanished from sight, reappearing behind the enemy lines, knocking out several soldiers before they even knew what hit them. Yuno watched in awe, realizing he had become even faster, even more powerful. She used the opening he created to administer aid to her fallen comrades. Humiliated, Liesult resorted to magic. He unleashed a spell called Flame Burst, targeting Harold, who dodged the attack, but his own pawns were killed, shocking Yuno and enraging Harold. Liesult sneered, asking what was wrong with disposing of incompetent pawns. Harold agreed, stating that there was nothing more troublesome than incompetence, and that such burdens should be abandoned. He then clarified, his voice dripping with contempt, that he was talking about Liesult and his men. Enraged beyond words, Liesult swore to torture Harold to death. Harold looked at the wounded Sumeragi soldiers, and a cold fury settled over him. This was a man he could not let live. He rushed forward, and Liesult met his charge with a barrage of spells. He opened a portal, firing a storm of magic spears, followed by a dance of lightning bolts, all without breaking a sweat. Harold was forced on the defensive, marveling at the man's ability to cast so many powerful spells in rapid succession. Liesult seemed to predict his every move. Realizing he couldn't close the distance on speed alone, Harold prepared a magic spell of his own. He fired it at the same time Lizolt launched another, and the two attacks canceled each other out in a blinding flash. Lizolt laughed, boasting that his power and accuracy were superior. Harold changed tactics. Instead of dodging, he charged straight through Lizolt's next attack, taking a critical hit, but using the opening to get within striking distance. Lizolt was caught by surprise, but he was able to cast another spell, Water Dragon, which struck Harold and caused him damage. Harold wiped the blood from his mouth and snarled that he was going to chop the man's head off. Seeing his determination, Lizolt resorted to his cruelest tactic once more, firing another volley of spears at the wounded soldiers. Harold used a dust storm spell to redirect most of them, but some got through. He had only one option. He threw himself in front of Yuno and her comrades, using his own body as a shield. Yuno closed her eyes, expecting death. When she opened them, Harold was standing over her, multiple small blades embedded in his back and shoulders. He methodically pulled them out with his bare hands, his expression hardening. A primal, murderous intent began to block out his rational thought. He saw red. All he wanted was to kill Lizolt. He caught himself just as he was about to lunge. He remembered his true mission was only to stop the man, not murder him. In that moment of clarity, he realized the source of the monstrous feeling. It was the real Harold Stokes, the original villain of the game, whose consciousness had been lurking within him from the very beginning. It explained the foul mouth, the innate arrogance, the ease with which he could play his part. It wasn't an act. Harold was always in control. He understood that eventually, one of them, Kazuki Hirasawa or Harold Stokes, would have to vanish. Or perhaps they would merge into something new entirely. But right now, he didn't care. If Harold truly existed within him, he needed his power. He was injured, furious, and outmatched. He surrendered to the feeling, asking the original Harold to lend him his strength. When the dust from the last attack settled, Harold was still standing, but the look in his eyes was different. It was colder, sharper, and utterly devoid of fear. Lizolt, impressed, offered him a chance to apologize and become his subordinate. Harold responded that he would rather die. He ordered Yuno to leave with the others at once. She quickly administered a healing spell to his worst wounds, whispering that Erika would never forgive her for leaving him. The final battle began. Harold decided to use his ultimate technique. He leaped high into the air. Lizolt mocked the move, knowing a fighter was most vulnerable mid-air, and fired another volley of spears. But then his jaw dropped. Harold was not falling. He was dashing through the air, changing direction with impossible agility, using the spears themselves as stepping stones. He flawlessly dodged every single blade, turning Lizolt's own attack into his pathway. The move completely turned the tables, putting the powerful magic user on the defensive. Harold landed directly in front of him. They engaged in a brief, furious sword fight that ended with Harold landing a magnificent dropkick to Lizolt's head, crushing him into the ground. Harold collapsed to his knees, catching his breath. The technique had taken a massive toll on him. He raised his sword to deliver the final blow, but froze as his friends, Irene, Sid, and Robinson, with Cody at their lead, burst into the clearing. They stared at him, at his Salian uniform, and at the defeated man at his feet, their faces a mixture of confusion and suspicion. He opened his mouth to try and explain, but the world went black as he passed out from sheer exhaustion. Far away, in a dark laboratory, Justice laughed. His subordinate informed him that their plan was nearing its final stage. But Eustace was no longer focused on the battle. He was intrigued by a new, unpredictable element. He wondered aloud if this boy, Harold Stokes, would be willing to work for him. A month later, in the royal capital, a crowd had gathered at the castle. Among them was Erika, accompanied by Yuno. It had been over 4 weeks since the Balus Forest incident, and she had not been permitted to see Harold. He was under official investigation. His involvement while wearing an enemy uniform meant he was suspected of being a spy. Yuno had explained that while many of the Sumeragi servants had been injured, they had all returned alive, thanks to Harold risking his life to create an escape route. Erika was determined to convey her gratitude. She knew he would likely dismiss it with a caustic remark, but she had to see him, to confirm with her own eyes that he was safe. She walked confidently toward the gate where a guard named Lowry stood watch. His annoyed expression told her this was a scene that had repeated itself many times. he told her firmly that he could not allow her to see the prisoner. Erika's composure began to crumble, her eyes welling with tears. Just then, Cody appeared, playfully scolding Lowry for bullying a little girl. He introduced himself to Erika as Harold's direct superior, claiming with a wide grin that Harold was always boasting about his cute girlfriend. Erika, momentarily flustered, knew this had to be a lie. The Harold she knew was far too prideful for such talk. Cody laughed and admitted he'd made it up, but then he gave her the good news. He could arrange for her to speak with him. He would take full responsibility. He led Erika and Yuno down a hallway to a small living area, asking them to wait while he fetched some tea. Erika peeked out the window, watching recruits doing their laundry in the courtyard below. She pictured Harold among them, scrubbing clothes with his usual smug, self-important expression, and the image made her chuckle. A knock came at the door. It wasn't Cody. Erika knew, with a sudden certainty that made her heart race, who it was. The door opened, and Harold stepped inside. He looked as surprised to see her as she was to see him. They stared at each other for a long moment before Erika found her voice. She said she had heard he was injured and was relieved to see him in good health. True to form, Harold replied that he was sorry to disappoint her by not being injured enough. He sat on the couch opposite her, arms crossed, and demanded to know what she wanted. Erika reiterated that she had come to check on his well-being and to thank him for saving her people. He scowled, calling her reasons idiotic. After a short, tense pause, he asked if that was all. Erika, panicking under his intense gaze, started to say there was something else, but then lost her nerve. Harold stood to leave, claiming he had no reason to stay. As he reached the door, Erika thanked him again for sparing his valuable time. He stopped and looked back at her. He told her that if she understood his time was valuable, she should stop bothering him and use formal channels next time, instead of employing a suspicious man like Cody. She started to apologize, but stopped when she saw him raise his hand. She flinched, but he didn't strike her. Instead, in a gesture that was so uncharacteristic it felt world-altering, he gently patted her on the head. Her expression melted into one of pure, unadulterated joy. He told her that her earlier scolding had been somewhat helpful, so he would give her some credit. And for the first time in their entire interaction, he addressed her by her name. Erika was so overwhelmed she began to cry, not from sadness, but from a flood of powerful emotions. It was the first time he had ever touched her with kindness, the first time he had treated her as something other than an annoyance. For Harold, it was the bare minimum of human decency, but for their relationship, it was a monumental milestone. Okay, review time. This was part 2 of the series, and honestly, it was such a good story. I really enjoyed diving into it, and I'm sure you guys did as well. The protagonist stands out with almost 2 personalities. Inside, he's determined to save everyone and avoid death flags. But on the outside, his actions come across as harsher and more negative, which makes him fascinating to follow. He's strong, but not the type to flaunt it constantly. Instead, he reveals his power only when it's truly needed, keeping the tension and excitement alive. The plot is solid. While it carries isekai elements, it doesn't feel generic, and the fights are well done, especially considering how young the protagonist is. The supporting characters could use a bit more spotlight, but the pacing and progression make up for it, making the whole experience really engaging. Overall, this was a very enjoyable chapter to recap.